Rome, 1931. A small crack in the floor of the church of San Clemente. Water damage, perhaps. Nothing to concern a city built on layers of its own forgotten history. But when workers descended with their tools to investigate, their torches caught something that shouldn't exist. Painted eyes staring back from the darkness, a face that hadn't seen light in 16 centuries. The archaeologists arrived within hours. Down they went, through medieval foundations, past early Christian ruins, deeper still into a chamber that predated the church by half a millennium. Their lights swept across walls alive with images. A young man in a strange Persian cap, kneeling before a massive bull, his blade already buried in the creature's throat, blood painted in ochre and cinnabar, still vibrant after 2,000 years. Around them, stone benches lined the walls, narrow, intimate, built for men sitting shoulder to shoulder in absolute darkness. This was a Mithraeum, a temple to a god Rome had tried to forget. But here's what made them pause. This wasn't just one hidden chamber. As they explored further, they found others, beneath Santa Prisca, under the baths of Caracalla, honeycomb beneath the Circus Maximus. Everywhere they looked, Christian Rome had been built directly on top of these underground sanctuaries. Not by accident. The placement was too deliberate, too systematic. Someone had known exactly where these temples were. Someone had buried them alive, then erected churches over their graves like spiritual headstones. Yet the temples survived, sealed but intact, waiting. The archaeologists stood in that first Mithraeum and tried to imagine the last ceremony held there. Sometime around 380 CE perhaps, a handful of aging initiates descending one final time, performing their mysteries in whispered urgency while Christian mobs roamed the streets above, then sealing the entrance themselves, hiding it so well that it vanished from memory entirely, protecting something, preserving something they believed would matter again someday. What happened in these chambers that demanded such secrecy? The stone benches suggested 40, maybe 50 men at a time. Senators had sat here, merchants, soldiers, slaves. The inscriptions proved it. Men who shared nothing above ground became brothers in this artificial cave. They ate together. They prayed together. They underwent something together that bound them more tightly than blood or law. And they told no one. Not their wives, not their children, not even other initiates from different temples. The oath of silence was absolute. Break it, and you didn't just face social disgrace or religious punishment. You faced death, the kind of death that served as an example. The mysteries weren't just secret. They were dangerous to know, dangerous to speak about, dangerous even to remember in the wrong way. 2,000 years later, standing in that rediscovered chamber beneath San Clemente, the archaeologists realized something profound. Rome had conquered the world with roads and legions and law. But underneath it all, beneath the marble and the rhetoric and the eagles, another empire had existed. An empire of shadows and whispers and blood. An empire that answered to different gods and followed different rules. Here's what makes the mystery cults truly strange. Thousands upon thousands of people were initiated. Merchants and emperors, poets and generals, people who wrote extensively about everything else in their lives. Daily purchases, political gossip, philosophical debates about the nature of clouds. Yet when it came to what they experienced in those underground chambers, they wrote nothing. Not one complete account survives. We have fragments, tantalizing pieces, a symbol carved into a tomb, 3 words on a broken tablet, Christian writers ranting about obscene practices and demonic rites while carefully avoiding any specific details. It's like trying to reconstruct an entire building from a handful of scattered bricks. You know something massive once stood there. You can sense its shape in the negative space. But the structure itself remains invisible. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who documented his every thought, was initiated into multiple mysteries. His meditations contain exactly 0 references to what he experienced. Hadrian built temples to these gods across the empire and underwent their most extreme rituals. His extensive correspondence mentions none of it. Commodus became so devoted to Mithras that he allegedly performed actual human sacrifices during ceremonies. The historical record confirms his initiation. What happened during those rites? Silence. 20 Roman emperors were initiates. 20 men with the power to command historians, commission monuments, and ensure their legacies lived forever. Not one dared write a single word about what they witnessed. The oath worked. Think about what that means. These weren't illiterate peasants terrified of supernatural punishment. These were educated, sophisticated men who understood the difference between superstition and reality. Yet something they experienced in those temples convinced them that breaking silence would be worse than death. Some force, some knowledge, some transformation occurred that made the oath feel not like a human constraint, but like a law of nature itself. The silence became its own kind of evidence. Renaissance scholars tried to break it. They studied every recovered inscription with obsessive care. They analyzed symbols. They compared myths across cultures. They even attempted to reconstruct initiation ceremonies based on fragmentary clues. Nothing worked. The mysteries remained mysterious. Later, Nazi archaeologists approached it differently, convinced these ancient cults held racial secrets or occult power. They excavated Mithraea across occupied Europe. They catalogued thousands of artifacts. They tortured suspected inheritors of mystery traditions. Still nothing. The silence held. But here's the disturbing part. The absence of information isn't random. It's too complete, too systematic. Initiates didn't accidentally forget to mention their experiences. They actively, deliberately, continuously chose silence over fame, over legacy, over the human need to share profound experiences. For 2,000 years, that choice remained consistent across languages, across cultures, across the entire span of the Roman world. Whatever happened in those chambers created a bond stronger than family, stronger than nationality, stronger than the survival instinct that makes people confess under torture. The mysteries transformed ordinary human beings into something else, something capable of taking secrets to their graves generation after generation after generation. And the deepest mystery of all, that silence wasn't broken by death. It wasn't broken by the destruction of the temples. It wasn't broken by the passage of 2 millennia. It's still not broken. We're still standing outside, listening to nothing, trying to understand what that nothing means. Picture a Roman citizen in the 2nd century, wealthy, educated, free, walking through the forum on a festival day when the priests perform their ancient rites. He passes the temple of Jupiter and watches slaves mechanically slaughter a white bull. The priest reads from a script so old nobody remembers what the words mean. Blood pools on marble. Smoke rises. The citizen keeps walking. He owns 3 villas. He's never been hungry, never been cold. His children will inherit more than he did. By every measure his civilization recognizes, he's successful, blessed by the gods. So why does he feel nothing? The traditional Roman religion worked perfectly for a city-state. You made offerings. The gods protected your crops and granted victory in local wars. Simple transaction, divine commerce. But Rome wasn't a city-state anymore. It was the entire known world, and the old gods seemed confused by their own success. Jupiter, Optimus, Maximus, the best and greatest, presided over an empire where children still died of fever, where plague could erase entire cities, where even emperors aged and weakened and died screaming in pain. The masters of the world discovered they were slaves to their own mortality. The rituals continued because they'd always continued. State religion, civic duty, but nobody believed anymore. Not really. The priests themselves went through motions inherited from ancestors, who'd inherited them from their ancestors. Tradition without meaning, theatre without audience. Our wealthy citizen makes his required offerings not because he expects divine favor, but because not making them would be socially awkward. He walks past the temple of Mars, past shrines to household gods whose names he can barely remember, past altars where incense burns to deities imported from everywhere Rome's legions have marched. Egyptian gods next to Syrian gods next to gods from Gaul and Germania and Britannia. The empire conquered the world and brought home its nightmares and its dreams and placed them all in the same marketplace. And something happened in that collision of cultures. The Syrian merchant at his usual corner doesn't just sell spices. He whispers about mysteries, about Baal who died and rose again, about initiations that promise something the Roman gods never offered. Personal salvation, direct experience of the divine, answers. The Egyptian prostitute who services soldiers talks about Isis between customers, how the goddess speaks to her in dreams, how she'll live forever because she's seen things that transcend death. A Persian slave in his household mentions Mithras, says nothing specific, just mentions the name with a look that suggests knowledge, secret knowledge, the kind of knowledge that makes a slave's eyes hold something a free man's don't. Our citizen has everything: wealth, status, power, education. He's read every philosopher. He knows the Greek mysteries exist but always seemed like superstition for foreigners. Yet now those foreigners are everywhere, and they possess something he doesn't, some certainty, some peace, some answer to the question that wakes him in the darkness before dawn. What happens when you die? The Roman gods never promised anything beyond the grave. You lived, you died, you became a shade in the underworld, a fading memory drinking blood sacrifices to remember your own name. But these foreign gods whispered different promises: eternal life, resurrection, transformation. The empire conquered the world, but couldn't conquer the one thing that mattered. And so Romans began descending into darkness, seeking light. The year is 204 BCE. Rome is losing the war with Hannibal. The Carthaginian general has slaughtered Roman armies for 15 years, and now stands at the gates of Italy itself. The Senate is desperate. They consult the Sibylline books, those mysterious prophecies kept under guard in the temple of Jupiter. The priestess delivers her verdict: only the Great Mother can save Rome. But the Great Mother isn't Roman. She's Cybele, the ancient goddess of Phrygia. Her sacred symbol isn't a statue carved by civilized hands. It's a black meteorite that fell from the sky in the age before memory. Her priests aren't dignified senators in togas. They're the Galli, men who've castrated themselves in ecstatic devotion, who wear women's clothing and speak in tongues and dance until they bleed. The Senate votes anyway. They're that desperate. The procession that brings Cybele to Rome is unlike anything the city has ever seen. The black stone on a golden litter, the Galli priests wailing and spinning, the sound of drums and cymbals and flutes playing in modes that make Roman ears hurt. Conservative senators line the streets and watch their carefully ordered world crack open. They've invited something into their city, something old, something that doesn't follow their rules. And Hannibal withdraws from Italy the following year. Rome conquered the East with swords, but the East conquered Roman souls with secrets. Every military campaign brought back more than loot and slaves. Soldiers stationed in Persia encountered Mithras in underground fire temples. They watched Persian priests perform mysteries at midnight and felt something stir in their chests, something their own gods had never touched. Merchants trading in Alexandria stumbled into Isis temples and emerged changed, unable to explain what they'd experienced, unable to forget it. Slaves became the ultimate transmission vector. A Thracian captured in war carries the mysteries of Sabazios in his memory. A Syrian woman sold in the Forum secretly maintains her devotion to Atargatis. They can take everything from a slave except what's inside their head. And what's inside their heads are gods Rome has never met. Gods with different demands, different promises, different kinds of power. The pattern repeats across the expanding empire: initial rejection, underground survival, gradual acceptance. The authorities understand the danger. These foreign cults don't respect Roman social hierarchy. In their temples, slaves sit beside senators. Women hold authority over men. The initiated claim loyalty to powers beyond the state, beyond the emperor, beyond law itself. But how do you stop an idea whose time has arrived? They try. They ban the worship of Isis 5 times in 50 years. They execute Bacchic cultists by the thousands. They restrict who can participate in mysteries and where they can gather. Every prohibition fails. Every persecution makes the cult stronger. Forbidden fruit tastes sweeter. Secret knowledge becomes more valuable when people die protecting it. By the 1st century CE, Rome is honeycombed with mystery temples, hidden in plain sight, beneath homes and bathhouses and military barracks. The greatest empire in history maintains order on the surface, while underneath in the darkness, Romans are being transformed into something their ancestors wouldn't recognize. The gates are open now, and they'll never close again. Hadrian's Wall, Northern Britannia, winter solstice. A Roman legionnaire descends stone steps into absolute darkness. His name is Marcus Valerius, and tonight he stops being that person. The air changes as he goes deeper. Warm, thick with smoke and something else, something organic. The smell of many men in an enclosed space, the smell of burnt offerings. His eyes adjust slowly. The Mithraeum is smaller than he expected, 30 feet long, maybe 12 feet wide, an artificial cave carved from living rock. The ceiling arches overhead, painted with stars, constellations positioned exactly as they appeared on some ancient night. Along both walls, stone benches. Already full, he recognizes the centurion who commands his unit, the quartermaster who controls supplies, the veteran who lost his hand in Germania, the Syrian auxiliary who speaks 6 languages. In the world above, these men live in strict hierarchy. Down here, rank dissolves. They're all brothers of the god, all soldiers in a war that transcends Rome's petty territorial struggles. At the far end, the image, the tauroctony. Mithras in his Persian cap, one knee on a massive bull, blade plunged deep into its throat. The bull's eyes roll back. Its blood becomes wheat and wine. A dog and serpent lap at the wound. A scorpion clamps onto the bull's genitals. The entire cosmos captured in one violent moment of transformation. Marcus doesn't understand yet. He will. The pater enters, the father priest, his face hidden behind a lion mask. He speaks in a language Marcus doesn't know, Persian maybe, or older than Persian. The chanting begins, low, rhythmic. The sound vibrates in Marcus's chest, bypasses his thoughts, speaks directly to something deeper. Drums join, the temperature rises, sweat begins to flow. This is how Mithraism spreads through the Roman military. Not through missionary preaching. Through this. Through experience that can't be explained, only undergone. From Syria to Britain, from the Rhine to the Danube, in every fortress on every frontier, soldiers descend into these artificial caves. They undergo something that binds them tighter than their oath to the emperor. They become part of a brotherhood that transcends legion and nationality and life itself. Archaeological evidence tells the story. Over 200 Mithraea discovered so far. But that's just what survived. Every military installation had one, sometimes multiple. The distribution maps show the empire's veins filled with this Persian mystery. Inscriptions reveal the participants, common soldiers and generals, slaves and freedmen, native Romans and foreign auxiliaries. The god doesn't discriminate based on birth. Only courage, only willingness to die and be reborn. The ceremonies aren't gentle. Recovered altars show stains that chemical analysis confirms are blood, human blood, animal blood. Both mixed together in rituals modern archaeology can only guess at. Pits beneath temple floors suggest initiates underwent ritual burial, emerging from earth like corpses returning to life. Astronomical symbols covering every surface hint at cosmic knowledge, secret teaching about the structure of heaven, about the soul's journey through planetary spheres. about humanity's role in the eternal battle between light and darkness. Mithraism isn't just a religion. It's a warrior cult, a mystery tradition, a revolutionary cosmology that positions humans as cosmic soldiers in a battle that began before time and will continue after the world ends. In every Roman fortress from Scotland to Syria, soldiers descended into artificial caves to be reborn in blood. And what they learned there, they never spoke about above ground. The image appears in every Mithraeum ever discovered. Minor variations exist, different artists, different materials, stone relief in Rome, painted fresco in Dura Europos, marble sculpture in Londinium. But the core elements never change. Always the same figures, always the same positions, always the bull dying beneath Mithras's blade. This isn't art, it's a code. Stand in front of any tauroctony long enough, and patterns emerge. The bull's position, the scorpion at its genitals, the dog and serpent drinking blood, the raven watching from above, the torchbearers flanking the scene, one raising his torch, one lowering it. Every element appears with such consistency across the empire that scholars knew immediately this scene contains specific information, deliberate teaching, truth encoded in symbolic language. But what truth? The first interpretation seems obvious. Agricultural fertility. The bull represents nature's generative power. Its death releases life. Blood becomes grain. The cycle of seasons, death, and rebirth. Simple, reassuring, almost certainly wrong, because the astronomical alignments are too precise. Modern researchers using computer modeling of ancient skies discovered something extraordinary. The tauroctony depicts a specific celestial configuration. The bull is Taurus, the scorpion is Scorpio, the dog is Canis Major, the serpent is Hydra, the raven is Corvus. Every figure in the scene corresponds to a constellation, and their positions mark a specific moment in cosmic time, the precession of the equinoxes. That slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts which constellation rises on the spring equinox. Around 2000 BCE, the spring equinox moved from Taurus to Aries. Mithras, killing the bull, represents the god, destroying the old cosmic age to create the new one. But initiates learned something deeper. Archaeological evidence suggests they didn't just contemplate this image, they reenacted it. Chemical analysis of altar stains confirms massive amounts of bull's blood. Skeletal remains in some Mithraea show evidence of bulls being slaughtered on site. The Taurobolium, the baptism in blood, initiates descended into pits, while bulls were sacrificed on grates above them. Hot blood poured down, drenching them, drowning them, transforming them. Christian writers describe these ceremonies with horrified fascination. They saw demonic parodies of their own sacraments, bread and wine consecrated in Mithraic rites, baptism in blood instead of water, a saviour god who died and rose again. The parallels were too close, too threatening. One religion clearly copied the other. The question was, which came first? Mithraic theology went further than simple sacrifice. Initiates believed the bull's death didn't just change the cosmos, it sustained it. The universe required periodic renewal through violence. Creation demanded destruction. Order emerged from chaos only through constant struggle. The battle never ends. The god must kill the bull again and again across eternity. And initiates had to become the god. That's what the grades of initiation prepared them for. Ascending through planetary spheres, accumulating cosmic knowledge, learning divine names, mastering the passwords that let souls navigate the afterlife. Until finally, at the highest grade, the initiate performed the central mystery, wielding the blade himself, becoming Mithras, becoming the cosmic force that maintains existence through sacred violence. The image was always the same, a god murdering the source of all life to create the world, and initiates had to become that god. The question isn't whether they actually sacrificed bulls. The question is what else they sacrificed to become divine. The ladder begins at Mercury and ends at Jupiter. 7 grades, 7 planetary gates, 7 deaths, 7 rebirths, each one more terrible than the last. Korax, the Raven, 1st grade, the messenger between worlds. Initiates learn to serve. They waited on higher grades during ceremonies, brought water and wine, maintained sacred fires. Observed, but didn't participate. Archaeological evidence suggests this grade lasted years. Patience was the first lesson. The ability to witness mysteries without understanding them, to accept that knowledge came slowly, painfully, through ordeal rather than explanation. Nymphos, the bride, 2nd grade, Venus. The initiate undergoes a mystical marriage. To whom? The god, the temple, other initiates. The inscriptions don't say. What they do reveal is that this grade involved veiling, covering the face. Symbolic feminization. Roman men trained since birth to embody martial masculinity had to embrace the opposite. Surrender. Receptivity. Opening themselves to be penetrated by divine presence. Miles, the soldier, 3rd grade. Mars. Here the initiate becomes a warrior of Mithras, branded, possibly, with hot iron, marks of ownership. Inscriptions mention the seal given at this grade. Archaeological finds include iron brands with Mithraic symbols. The initiate swears absolute loyalty, not to Rome, not to the emperor, to the god and the brotherhood. Conflicting loyalties end here. You choose. Leo, the lion, 4th grade, the Sunday fire initiation. Surviving reliefs show lions with flames emerging from their mouths. Honey poured instead of water during ceremonies. Lions don't drink water, the texts explain. They consume fire. What does that mean literally? Were initiates burned, made to endure heat, to walk through flames? The evidence is fragmentary but disturbing. Some Mithraea contain rooms with hypercore systems capable of generating extreme temperatures. Endurance chambers. Testing grounds for men who claim to transcend physical limitation. Perses, the Persian. 5th grade, the moon. The mysteries deepen. This grade owned the fruits served during sacred meals, controlled access to substances that altered consciousness. The term Persian connects to Mithras's origin, to ancient knowledge predating Rome. Initiates at this level learned the theological foundations, the cosmic dualism, the eternal war between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. Between order and chaos, they became teachers themselves, preparing lower grades for what came next. Heliodromus, the Sunrunner, 6th grade. Saturn, the charioteer of the sun. Representations show this grade driving the solar chariot across the heavens, navigating the cosmos. The astronomical knowledge intensifies here. Planetary movements, celestial mechanics, the structure of the universe. This wasn't symbolic learning. It was practical training for the soul's post-mortem journey, learning to navigate the planetary gates that trapped human souls in cycles of reincarnation. Pater, the father, 7th grade, Jupiter, the final transformation. The initiate becomes priest, authority over life and death, spiritual and literal. The Pater conducted mysteries, wore the lion mask, spoke with divine voice. During ceremonies, he didn't represent Mithras. He was Mithras, divine possession, the human vessel emptied out, replaced by cosmic consciousness. To become divine, initiates had to die 7 times, each death more terrible than the last. But here's what the archaeologists found that changes everything. Most initiates never progressed past the 3rd grade. Miles, the soldier. Only a tiny elite reached Pater, maybe 1 in 100. The pyramid structure mirrors Mithraism itself. Many called, few chosen, fewer still worthy. What happened to those who failed? What happened to those who began climbing and couldn't continue? The inscriptions don't say. But some Mithraea contain unmarked bones buried in strange positions, bodies that weren't given proper funerals, people who vanished from official records after entering the mysteries. Maybe some transformations didn't succeed. Here's what Roman authorities slowly realized. Mithraism wasn't just a religion, it was a parallel command structure embedded inside their military. The evidence emerges piece by piece. Inscriptions showing centurions who answered to patas of different legions. Supply records with unexplained shipments between Mithraic temples hundreds of miles apart. Letters using coded language that made sense only to initiates. The Brotherhood created networks that transcended official chains of command. A common soldier initiated to Leo might outrank an uninitiated centurion within temple walls, and those temple relationships bled into the world above. Military decisions influenced by religious loyalty. Promotions granted based on Mithraic grade rather than martial achievement. Information shared between brotherhoods before official military intelligence received it. The Empire had built a machine for conquest and control, and that machine had grown a shadow nervous system the emperors couldn't see. Archaeological discoveries reveal the extent. Mithraea beneath every major military installation, but also beneath government buildings, provincial governors' palaces, imperial administrators' villas. The cult penetrated every level of Roman power. Tax collectors and judges and provincial prefects, all potentially answering to the same hidden hierarchy. All bound by oaths that superseded their oaths to Rome. Some emperors tried to break this power. Others decided joining was safer than fighting. Marcus Aurelius was initiated. So was Commodus, though his devotion became obsessive, possibly mad. He allegedly performed the Taurobolium with human victims instead of bulls. History records this as evidence of his insanity. But what if it was evidence of how seriously some emperors took Mithraic theology? What if the cosmic battle between light and darkness demanded more than animal sacrifice? The inscriptions hint at darker possibilities. References to the necessary crime, to blood that must be spilled, to initiates who offered themselves for the salvation of the Brotherhood. Voluntary human sacrifice, ritual murder framed as devotion, or coded language meaning something else entirely. We know the cult involved secrets worth killing for. Church fathers later claimed Mithraists murdered apostates, not officially, not publicly, but men who threatened to reveal mysteries simply vanished, found dead in apparent accidents, suicides that might not have been suicide. The oath of silence wasn't just enforced by social pressure or religious fear. It was enforced by a brotherhood that had learned violence in service to cosmic order. Every Roman emperor after Marcus Aurelius faced the same choice: join them or fear them. Constantine chose a third option. He converted to Christianity and systematically dismantled Mithraic power. His conversion wasn't just spiritual, it was strategic. Christianity offered something Mithraism couldn't: universal appeal. Women could join, slaves could become priests, the poor had equal access to salvation. Mithraism's exclusivity and military focus made it powerful but brittle. Christianity's universalism made it unstoppable. But the transition wasn't peaceful. Mithraea was sealed violently. Broken pottery, smashed altars, evidence of deliberate desecration. Yet strangely, many seem to have been sealed by their own congregations, carefully, reverently, hiding sacred objects for potential future recovery, as if they knew this wasn't the end, just dormancy, waiting for the cosmic wheel to turn again. Military traditions absorbed Mithraic elements, hierarchical grades, initiation rituals, blood brotherhood. Even modern armed forces carry echoes of the mysteries. Structures so effective they survived the god they served. The temples are gone, the god is forgotten, but the empire within the empire never completely died. It just learned to wear different masks. Philae, the sacred island in the Nile, the last functioning temple of Isis in the entire world. The year is 537 CE. Christianity has ruled the empire for 2 centuries. Every other pagan temple is ruins or churches. But here, Egyptian priests still perform the daily rituals, still wake the goddess with hymns at dawn, still dress her statue, still make offerings as their ancestors have done for 3,000 years unbroken. The temple will close today. Imperial soldiers are coming. But for this final morning, Isis still reigns. She has more names than can be counted. In Egypt, she's Isis, throne of pharaohs, crown of the world. In Greece, she's merged with Demeter, Aphrodite, Artemis. In Rome, she's Regina Caeli, queen of heaven. In Syria, she's Atargatis. In Gaul, she wears Celtic faces. In Britannia, she speaks with British tongues. Every goddess who ever existed is ultimately her. Every divine feminine that humans ever imagined flows back to this single source. She whispered to her initiates, "I am all that has been, that is, and that shall be, and no mortal has ever lifted my veil." But thousands tried, and succeeded. Isis offered what no other deity could: universal salvation. It didn't matter if you were male or female, slave or free, Roman or barbarian, moral or broken. The goddess accepted everyone. Her mysteries were open to all who genuinely sought her. No blood purity requirements, no gender restrictions, no social class gatekeeping, just sincere devotion, just the willingness to be transformed. This made her dangerous. Roman religion depended on hierarchy: citizen over foreigner, male over female, free over slave. The traditional gods enforced these boundaries. Jupiter blessed patriarchs, Mars favored warriors. Vesta guarded Roman bloodlines. Each deity maintained their assigned category of existence, but Isis recognized no categories. In her temples, the natural order Rome depended on dissolved. Archaeological evidence reveals her reach. Isis temples in every corner of the empire, from Hadrian's Wall to the Euphrates, from the Atlas Mountains to the Black Sea. More temples than any god except Jupiter himself. More inscriptions, more votive offerings, more evidence of genuine devotion across centuries. She survived longer than the other mysteries, outlasted Mithras, outlasted Cybele, outlasted Dionysus. When Christianity finally closed Philae, Isis had reigned for 3 millennia. Why such staying power? Because she evolved, she absorbed, she adapted. When people compared her to their local goddesses, she didn't reject the comparison. She became those goddesses. When new devotees brought new needs, she developed new aspects. Isis the healer, Isis the sorceress, Isis the mourning widow, Isis the fierce protector, Isis the cosmic mother. 10,000 names for 10,000 human longings. The ancient writers tried to describe her appeal. Plutarch wrote philosophical treatises on her mysteries. Apuleius wrote the only surviving first-hand account of mystery initiation. Even hostile Christian fathers admitted her power. They saw how she moved people, how initiates wept at her altars, how they claimed she spoke to them in dreams, how they faced death calmly because they'd seen her face and knew death was just another veil. The goddess didn't offer theology. She offered presence, not rules but relationship, not commandments but transformation. And when you died, she promised to guide you personally through the underworld, not as abstract divine force, as herself, speaking your name, welcoming you home. 3,000 years later, we're still trying to understand how one goddess conquered the ancient world using only love. March 5th, the Navigium Isidis, the festival when Isis opens the sailing season and promises safe voyages to all who honor her. Rome's streets fill with procession before dawn. This is the public face of the mysteries, the spectacle designed to tantalize, to recruit, to offer glimpses of secrets that can't be spoken. First come the women throwing rose petals, paths of flowers for the goddess's feet. Then musicians, flutes and sistra, the sacred rattles whose sound supposedly mirrors the Nile's flooding. The music bypasses rational thought, creates trance states, pulls spectators into altered consciousness, even as observers. The priestesses follow, dressed in white linen, Egyptian style, their heads shaved in the ancient manner. They carry sacred objects, a golden lamp that never extinguishes, a small boat that symbolizes the soul's journey, a winnowing fan that represents purification. Each object means something, teaches something, but only initiates understand the language. Then come the priests, the pastophori, shrine bearers, carrying the goddess's portable sanctuary. Inside, hidden behind curtains, sits the sacred object, the mystery. No uninitiated eyes ever see it. Speculation runs wild. A statue, a symbol, a relic from Egypt's oldest temples? The priests themselves might not know, might not be high enough grade to look. The procession reaches the harbour. A ship waits, beautiful, decorated with Isiac symbols, lotus flowers and ankhs, and the throne hieroglyph that is the goddess's name. The high priest performs the blessing, consecrates the vessel to Isis's protection, pronounces it ready to carry souls across dangerous waters to safe harbours. Everyone watching understands the metaphor. Life is the dangerous sea. Death is the voyage. Isis promises safe passage for those who know her mysteries. But Apuleius tells us what happens next. For those ready, for those who've been called. The public spectacle was just beginning. The real mystery occurred in private temples after crowds dispersed. He describes his own initiation in The Golden Ass, the only first-hand account of ancient mystery initiation that survives, and even he won't reveal everything. He writes, "I approached the boundary of death. I set foot on Proserpina's threshold. I travelled through all the elements and returned. At midnight I saw the sun blazing with bright light. I came face to face with the gods below and the gods above, and worshipped them from close at hand." Voluntary death. That's what he calls it. The initiate dies while still breathing, descends to the underworld, sees things living humans aren't meant to see, then returns transformed, reborn. No longer afraid of death because they've already died, already know what waits beyond the veil. At midnight, initiates saw the sun shining in full brilliance and understood they would never truly die. The ritual itself remains unknown. Apuleius danced in 12 robes, was crowned with palm, stood illuminated like the sun at the ceremony's climax, emerged to worship crowds who saw him as living God. What occurred during the hours before that emergence? What did he experience in darkness that convinced him he'd conquered death? The archaeological evidence suggests sensory deprivation, carefully controlled revelation, probably psychoactive substances, definitely sophisticated theatre. Underground chambers at Isis temples show acoustic engineering, hidden passages for dramatic appearances, machinery for creating supernatural effects. But initiates insisted it wasn't theatre. The goddess actually came, actually spoke, actually transformed souls at fundamental levels. And they spent the rest of their lives trying to prove it through how they lived, how they died, how they faced the end, with mysterious smiles. The temple inscriptions read like medical journals from another reality. Isis came to me in a dream and healed my blindness. The goddess spoke my name and my fever broke. She showed me where to find my stolen property. Hundreds of testimonies. Thousands. All describing direct communication with the divine. This wasn't metaphor. Isis worship centered on personal relationship, individual connection. The goddess didn't speak through official priests reading scripts. She spoke directly, in dreams, in visions, through possession that left devotees changed. The practice was called incubation, sleeping in temples specifically to receive divine dreams. Isis temples across the empire had special chambers for this purpose, small rooms, often underground, dark, quiet, designed to remove external stimuli so internal visions could emerge. Devotees would fast, purify themselves, then lie on temple floors and wait for the goddess to come. Sometimes they waited days, weeks, months. Temple records from Egypt document people living in sanctuary for extended periods, sleeping every night, waiting for Isis to grant them vision or healing or knowledge. The priests interpreted dreams, offered guidance, prescribed treatments based on divine instruction received during sleep. Modern psychiatry recognizes what ancient Isis priests practiced: dream interpretation, talk therapy, treatment of mental illness through religious framework. The distinction between physical and psychological illness didn't exist. Both were spiritual problems requiring spiritual solutions. Depression was divine absence. Anxiety was loss of cosmic connection. Healing came through restoring relationship with the goddess. But Isis' possession went beyond dreams. Priestesses trained to become living channels. The goddess would enter them during ceremonies, speak through their mouths, move their bodies. Conscious possession. The priestess remained aware but shared space with divine presence. Witnesses described voices changing, mannerisms transforming, the goddess looking out through human eyes. When Isis spoke through her priestesses, even emperors trembled, for the goddess recognized no earthly authority. That's what made her dangerous. A slave girl possessed by Isis could speak to senators with divine authority, could pronounce judgment, could issue commands that superseded human hierarchy. Who could argue with the goddess herself? Who could claim their worldly rank mattered more than divine presence? Roman authorities tried to regulate this, insisted only certain priestesses could channel deity, required official sanction for prophecy, banned unsupervised possession. Every law failed. Isis spoke where she wanted, through whom she wanted, when she wanted. The goddess refused to be controlled. Medical papyri reveal sophisticated knowledge. Isis priests understood which herbs altered consciousness, which fasting regimens produced visions, which breathing techniques induced trance states. They pioneered what modern researchers call technologies of ecstasy, methods for reliably accessing non-ordinary consciousness, not random mystical experiences, repeatable techniques, scientific spirituality. Women particularly found power through Isis. In a world where female authority was constrained, channeling the goddess created space for female voice, female wisdom, female command. Some wealthy Roman women funded entire temples, served as high priestesses, wielded influence through religious authority when political power was denied them. The goddess offered what the world wouldn't: recognition, value, direct experience of the divine that required no male intermediary, no father or husband or priest to interpret, just woman and goddess. Immediate, intimate, revolutionary. Early Christianity borrowed heavily from Isis devotion. Mary's titles, her role as Divine Mother, her protection of the faithful, the practice of praying for her intercession, all echo Isiac tradition. Some scholars suggest early Marian devotion attracted former Isis worshippers who needed that divine feminine presence. The temples closed. The priestesses fell silent. But women continued dreaming of a goddess who spoke their names. And sometimes they still claim she answers. The dining hall at the Isis temple in Pompeii tells a story the walls above couldn't. Archaeological excavation revealed the arrangement: stone couches, equal-sized, arranged in circles rather than hierarchies. Food remains suggesting identical meals. No head table, no position of honor, just devotees eating together as equals. A senator reclined next to a freedwoman, a merchant beside a slave, a Roman matron beside a Syrian prostitute. In the world above, they would never meet, never speak, never acknowledge each other's existence. Down here, in Isis's house, social distinctions dissolved. The goddess called them all her children. Human rankings meant nothing. In Isis temples, slaves gave commands to their masters, and the natural order of Rome began to crumble. This wasn't symbolic equality, it was structural revolution. Temple inscriptions prove slaves held priestly offices. Women outranked men. Foreign-born initiates commanded native Romans. The mysteries created parallel social hierarchies based on spiritual advancement rather than birth or wealth. And those spiritual hierarchies bled into the world outside. A master who shared Isiac initiation with his slave couldn't quite relate the same way, couldn't unsee the spiritual equality they'd experienced together, couldn't ignore the bond created by shared mysteries. Some freed their initiated slaves, others granted privileges, a few even named them heirs. The transformation was subtle but real. Women experienced even more dramatic change. Isis priestesses wielded authority that should have been impossible. They owned property, controlled temple finances, made decisions affecting entire communities. Rich Roman women funded temple construction and had their names inscribed as patrons. Poor women found dignified work as temple attendants. The goddess provided economic independence that Roman society otherwise denied. The revolution spread through burial practices. Isis initiates created death cooperatives, pooled resources to ensure proper funerals for members who died alone or poor. Slave and senators' funerals cost the same. Everyone received identical rights. Isis promised to welcome all her children equally in the afterlife, so her living children ensured equality in death. Roman authorities recognized the threat. 5 times between 59 and 48 BCE they banned Isis worship. 5 times they tore down temples and executed priests. 5 times the cult returned stronger. You can't kill a goddess who promises universal love. You can't suppress mysteries that offer meaning to people who have nothing else. Eventually they stopped trying. Augustus officially recognized Isis worship, built her a magnificent temple on the Campus Martius, co-opted rather than fought, Roman pragmatism. If you can't beat them, join them, control them from inside. But something interesting happened. As Christianity spread, former Isis worshippers converted in huge numbers. They recognized something familiar, a religion that preached equality, that welcomed poor and wealthy, that offered personal relationship with deity, that promised eternal life to all believers, regardless of status. Early Christianity and Isis worship shared so much DNA that church fathers had to explain the similarities. Their solution? Satan had created Isis mysteries as a deliberate counterfeit of Christ, a demonic parody designed to confuse souls. The similarities weren't parallel development, they were spiritual warfare. Modern scholars see it differently. Christianity succeeded partly by offering what Isis offered, but without the foreign Egyptian baggage. Without the shaved heads and white linen and elaborate rituals, universal salvation made portable, mystery made accessible, revolution made respectable. The goddess taught the Roman world that equality was possible. Christianity inherited that lesson and conquered an empire with it. Sometimes, revolutions succeed by changing names. Rome, 186 BCE. The Senate receives testimony from Hispala Faecinia, a freedwoman who speaks of things that shouldn't exist inside the city walls. Secret nocturnal gatherings, wine mixed with substances that steal reason, sexual acts that violate nature, violence committed in religious frenzy, and underneath it all, conspiracy. Networks of initiates bound by oaths that supersede loyalty to Rome itself. The Bacchanalian conspiracy. The first time Roman authorities understood what they'd allowed into their city by tolerating foreign mysteries. 7,000 arrests, mass executions, emergency legislation prohibiting Bacchic worship throughout Italy. But the testimonies revealed something more disturbing than conspiracy. They revealed what Dionysus actually did to his followers. How the god of wine and madness transformed respectable Roman citizens into something that frightened even themselves. To meet Dionysus was to lose yourself forever, and his initiates sought this destruction with desperate desire. The Villa of Mysteries at Pompeii preserves the initiation sequence in vivid frescoes. A young woman begins fully clothed, curious, innocent. By the final panel, she's been flagellated, has witnessed the revelation of the sacred phallus, and sits transformed. Something in her eyes has changed. The before and after is captured in paint. Before, she's human. After, she's something else. Dionysus offered what other gods couldn't: complete dissolution of identity, the chance to stop being yourself, to shed the burden of individual consciousness, to merge with divine madness, and lose the boundaries that separated self from cosmos. For people trapped in rigid identities, slaves who couldn't escape servitude, women who couldn't escape patriarchy, men who couldn't escape military service, this promise was intoxicating. But the god demanded payment. You couldn't just visit divine madness and return unchanged. Dionysus marked his followers, made them permanent residents of the borderland between sanity and something beyond sanity. They learned to channel it, to function in the world above. But part of them always remained in the wild places where the god danced. The mythological stories make this explicit. Dionysus arrives in a city. The king refuses him. The women go mad. They tear the king apart with bare hands. The god isn't metaphor. He's actual force that hijacks human neurology, that bypasses rational mind and unleashes what civilization works to contain. Roman authorities understood this. The Bacchanalian scandal wasn't about immorality. Plenty of immoral behavior happened in Rome without prosecution. It was about loss of control, about Romans who'd touched something that made them unpredictable, ungovernable, potentially dangerous. The frescoes show the moment of transformation. The initiate kneels. The priestess raises the whip. The flagellation begins. Pain, wine, music, exhaustion, all calibrated to break down normal consciousness, to crack open the vessel of self so something else can enter. And something does enter. Initiates described it as possession, becoming the god, Dionysus dancing inside your skin, your voice speaking his words, your hands performing his violence, the sparagmos tearing living creatures apart in divine frenzy, eating raw flesh, drinking blood, actions you'd never commit in rational mind but which become inevitable when the god commands. The villa preserved these mysteries in art because Romans couldn't preserve them in writing. You can't explain Dionysian possession to someone who hasn't experienced it. The words don't exist. The concepts don't translate. You can only show the transformation, before and after, human and divine touched, sane and beautifully mad. The ceremony begins at dusk in a grove outside the city. No temples, no civilized architecture. Dionysus belongs to wild places, to mountains and forests where human law doesn't reach. The initiates gather, men and women together, already transgressive. Roman religion carefully segregates gender, but Dionysus recognizes no such boundaries. The wine flows, not ordinary wine. Chemical analysis of residues from recovered Dionysian vessels reveals additives, datura, henbane, belladonna, psychoactive compounds that transform wine from social lubricant into shamanic tool. The Greeks called it mixing the crater, the ritual preparation of consciousness-altering drink. Each cult guarded its specific recipe, passed down through generations, calibrated to produce specific effects. The music starts. Drums, cymbals, flutes, playing in hypnotic rhythms, not melodic, not pleasant, designed to bypass the thinking mind, to speak directly to the body. The heartbeat accelerates, matches the drum tempo. Breath synchronizes with the flute's phrasing. The rational mind that makes you an individual begins to dissolve. Dancing follows, whirling, spinning, hours of continuous movement. Exhaustion becomes ecstasy. The body's normal regulatory systems overload. Endorphins flood the brain. The wine's additives peak. Consciousness shifts into altered states. And the god arrives. Initiates drank a wine that contained more than grapes, and what they saw in their intoxication changed them forever. The archaeological evidence shows what happened next. Animal bones broken in ways that suggest being torn apart by bare hands rather than butchered. The sparagmos, ripping living creatures to pieces, the Maenad's gift. divine strength channeled through human hands, bulls pulled apart, goats torn limb from limb, the warm flesh consumed raw, blood drunk from the wounds, becoming the god by consuming his sacrifice. Modern observers dismiss this as exaggeration, hostile propaganda from critics. But the bone evidence confirms it. The scattered remains at Dionysian sanctuary sites show violence inconsistent with normal sacrifice. Fracture patterns suggesting massive force. Distributions suggesting frenzied scattering rather than organized ritual. The thesis wasn't just symbolic. Archaeological finds reveal the pine-cone-tipped staff concealed a sharp blade. It was weapon disguised as religious implement. During ceremonies, when divine madness peaked, the thyrsus transformed, became spear, became means of ecstatic violence. The masks were crucial technology. Wearing them, initiates became someone else. The mask gave permission. You aren't doing this violence. The god is. You aren't speaking these words. Dionysus is. The psychological barrier between acceptable and unacceptable behavior dissolved when the mask went on. Some scholars believe human sacrifice occurred during extreme ceremonies. The evidence is controversial, circumstantial, but ancient writers mention it repeatedly. Pentheus, torn apart by his mother. Orpheus dismembered by Maenads. Are these myths, or sanitized memories of actual practices? Cursed tablets recovered from Dionysian sites contain disturbing phrases. The necessary death, the one who volunteers, the gift that sustains the god. Are these metaphors, references to ego death, or something more literal? The Roman suppression in 186 BCE included specific accusations. Initiates forced to participate in murder while intoxicated, waking to find blood on their hands, bound by shared guilt into silence. The perfect blackmail mechanism, the perfect way to ensure oaths weren't broken. Whether literal human sacrifice occurred, one truth remains certain. Dionysian mysteries involved violence that participants would never commit in ordinary consciousness. The god didn't just inspire ecstasy, he commanded actions that horrified the rational mind, but felt divinely necessary in altered states. The masks came off, the intoxication faded, but the memory remained. What you did when the god possessed you, what you became when civilization's restraints dissolved. And knowing that capacity existed inside you, that potential for sacred violence, that changed people forever. But Dionysus wasn't just madness. Behind the frenzy lay sophisticated philosophy. Orphic traditions merged with Dionysian practice to create complex theology. The initiated philosophers understood something the uninitiated observers missed. The madness was the method, the violence was the teacher, the dissolution of self was the point. Plato wrote about divine madness, called it the highest form of wisdom, distinguished between four types: prophetic, mystical, poetic, and erotic, all connected to Dionysus, all involving temporary insanity that revealed truths inaccessible to rational thought. He wasn't describing pathology, he was describing spiritual technology. Roman philosophers discovered that madness, properly channeled, was the highest form of wisdom. The Orphic Dionysian theology proposed radical ideas. The soul is imprisoned in the body, trapped in material existence by the crime of the Titans. Everyday consciousness is the real madness, the illusion of separation, the delusion of individual identity. Dionysian ecstasy shatters that illusion, returns consciousness to its primordial unity, to the state before the fall into matter. Neoplatonists later systematized this. Plotinus wrote about henosis, union with the One, the mystical experience of dissolving into ultimate reality. He described techniques remarkably similar to Dionysian practices: fasting, meditation, ritual, all designed to break down ego boundaries, to achieve temporary death of the individual self so the cosmic self could emerge. Aristocratic Romans practiced refined versions of these mysteries. Evidence from villas shows Dionysian imagery in private religious spaces, not the wild mountain rites. Controlled ceremonies, philosophical symposia where wine and discussion produced mild altered states, enough to glimpse divine madness without complete loss of control. Dionysus domesticated, made safe for the educated classes. But the philosophy remained revolutionary. It proposed that civilization itself was pathological, that all social structures were chains, that true freedom required periodic returns to primordial chaos, that humans needed regular dissolution of identity to remain psychologically healthy. This terrified authorities. If Dionysian philosophy was correct, then all of Rome's carefully constructed social order was not just arbitrary, but actively harmful. The very civilization they'd built was spiritual prison. The laws they enforced were shackles on divine consciousness. Some emperors understood this, embraced it. Caligula allegedly participated in Dionysian rites. His reported madness might have been divine possession. His violation of every social taboo might have been mystical practice. History remembers him as insane. But what if he was living Dionysian philosophy, deliberately destroying conventional behavior patterns to achieve cosmic consciousness? Nero performed in theaters, sang, danced, violated the dignity expected of emperors. Traditional historians see decadence, but Dionysian initiates see divine performance. The emperor becoming the god of theater, channeling creative madness, using art as spiritual practice. The philosophy influenced Christian mystics, desert fathers who fasted until they hallucinated, who flagellated themselves into visionary states, who sought annihilation of ego through ascetic practice. They would have rejected the comparison, insisted their practices came from Christ, but the techniques were Dionysian. The goal was the same: death of self, union with divine. Modern psychology recognizes what ancient philosophers knew. Ego dissolution produces lasting psychological changes, increased empathy, reduced death anxiety, greater sense of cosmic connection. The Dionysians discovered this through wine and violence and ritual. Modern researchers discover it through controlled psychedelic research. The methods differ. The destination is identical: loss of self, discovery of something beyond self, return changed, forever marked by knowledge that individual identity is both precious and illusion. The god taught ecstasy, but ecstasy taught philosophy, and philosophy justified the madness that initially seemed only destruction. The Senate received Hispala Facinia's testimony with growing horror. She described an organization, networks spanning all of Italy, cells operating independently but coordinating actions. New initiates sworn to secrecy on pain of death. The ceremonies were just recruitment. The real purpose was political, economic, criminal. The Bacchic cults had become something Rome had never faced before. A shadow government, a state within the state. 7,000 arrests followed. Livy's account describes mass executions, bodies displayed as warnings, emergency legislation that remained law for centuries, the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, the senatorial decree against Bacchic worship, still surviving on bronze tablets, one of the most important legal documents from Republican Rome. But what was the conspiracy actually about? Modern historians debate this. Some see moral panic, hysteria about foreign cults that got out of control. Others see genuine threat. Evidence suggests Bacchic networks did coordinate economic activity, shared information, protected members, created parallel systems of loyalty that threatened Roman social order. The testimony described specific crimes, initiates who inherited wealth under mysterious circumstances, business rivals who died in convenient accidents, witnesses who changed testimony or disappeared, magistrates who couldn't investigate because too many officials were initiates themselves. The conspiracy wasn't overthrowing Rome, it was infiltrating Rome, replacing Roman loyalty with Bacchic loyalty, one initiate at a time. Rome executed thousands of Bacchic initiates, yet their gods' laughter echoed through the empire for centuries. Because the suppression failed completely, Dionysian worship didn't end. It transformed, moved from large public gatherings to small private ceremonies, from ecstatic groups to controlled family traditions. The wild mountain rites became respectable household mysteries. The dangerous god became a domesticated deity, safe enough to tolerate, threatening enough to remain powerful. Archaeological evidence shows Dionysian worship increasing after the suppression. More temples, more inscriptions, more artistic depictions. The Senate's attempt to eliminate the mysteries instead advertised them, made them prestigious, fashionable. Forbidden fruit tastes sweeter. Secret knowledge becomes more valuable when people die protecting it. The god adapted. Always had. Dionysus in mainland Greece differed from Dionysus in Asia Minor. Dionysus in Rome took yet another form. He learned to survive by becoming what each culture needed. In the Republic, he was threat. In the Empire, he became patron of theatre, wine, and artistic creativity. Dangerous still, but channeled, controlled, mostly. The 2nd century CE saw massive Dionysian revival. The Antonine emperors tolerated and possibly participated in mysteries. Wealthy Romans decorated homes with elaborate Bacchic scenes. Sarcophagi depicted the dead joining Dionysian triumph. The god's promise of immortality through ecstatic dissolution attracted a civilization increasingly anxious about death. Early Christians recognized a competitor. They saw the parallels immediately. Bread and wine consecrated in religious ceremony. A god who died and rose again. Promises of eternal life through mystical union. The Christians insisted Dionysus was demonic parody, Satan mimicking Christ to steal souls. Modern scholars see convergent evolution. Human spirituality discovering similar solutions to identical problems. The need for transcendence, for meaning, for something beyond mundane existence. Dionysus offered one path, Christ offered another. Both required death of the old self. Both promised rebirth as something divine. When Christianity finally triumphed, Dionysian elements didn't disappear. They infiltrated. The Eucharist contains Dionysian echoes. Mystical traditions, emphasizing ecstatic union, reflect Bacchic theology. Medieval carnival literally means farewell to flesh. Dionysian ritual baptized in Christian context. The conspiracy succeeded, not by overthrowing Rome, by becoming Rome, by infiltrating so thoroughly that even enemies absorbed Dionysian elements without recognizing them. The god taught survival through transformation, through becoming what each age required while remaining essentially himself. Divine madness. Ecstatic truth. The dissolution of boundaries that separate sacred from profane, rational from inspired, human from divine. Rome killed thousands to stop him, but you can't kill madness. You can only learn to dance with it. The sacred way from Athens to Eleusis. 15 miles of road walked by every great mind of antiquity. Plato walked this path. Aristotle, Cicero, Marcus Aurelius, Sophocles, Aeschylus. The complete catalogue of ancient intellectuals reads like a list of Eleusinian initiates. Some things you couldn't claim to truly understand philosophy without experiencing. Eleusis was one of them. The mysteries lasted nearly 2,000 years, from Mycenaean times through the Roman Empire until Alaric's Visigoths destroyed the sanctuary in 396 CE. 2 millennia of continuous tradition. The longest surviving mystery cult, the most prestigious, the one that even Christian emperors hesitated to suppress because shutting Eleusis felt like closing the world's oldest university. Every great mind of antiquity walked this road, and everyone emerged claiming they no longer feared death, yet none would say why. The pilgrimage happened annually in September. Thousands of initiates from across the Mediterranean. They gathered at the Stoa Poikile in Athens, underwent preliminary purification in the sea at Phaleron, sacrificed piglets, fasted, then began the procession, walking together, singing hymns, carrying sacred objects wrapped in cloth, so uninitiated eyes couldn't see them. The journey took all day. At intervals, they stopped for rituals whose meaning was lost when the mysteries ended. At one bridge, masked figures shouted insults at prominent initiates, breaking down social hierarchy, reminding everyone that before the goddess, rank meant nothing. Wealthy aristocrats endured mockery from slaves. Generals accepted abuse from civilians. Ego dissolution began on the road. They arrived after sunset. The telesterion rose before them, massive, unlike any other Greek temple. Not a house for god statues, but an initiation hall, capable of holding 3,000 people simultaneously. Archaeological excavation reveals sophisticated architecture, multiple levels, underground chambers, acoustic engineering, the ancient world's most advanced religious technology contained in one building. But what happened inside remained absolutely secret. The penalty for revealing Eleusinian mysteries was death. Not metaphorical, literal execution. Alcibiades nearly died for allegedly profaning the mysteries at a private party. Socrates' student Aeschines was exiled for unauthorized revelation. The secrecy wasn't superstition. It was enforced by law, by culture, by absolute consensus that some knowledge was too sacred for casual discussion. The myth everyone knew was simple. Demeter, grief-stricken over Persephone's abduction, wandered the earth, arrived at Eleusis, received hospitality from King Kelios. In gratitude, she taught humans agriculture and founded the mysteries. Persephone returned from the underworld for 6 months each year, death and rebirth, agricultural cycle, the exoteric teaching. But initiates learned something deeper, something that made death lose its terror. Ancient writers describe this transformation repeatedly. Cicero wrote, "We have been given a reason not only to live in joy but also to die with better hope." Plutarch, "Death isn't to be feared by initiates." Pindar, "Blessed is he who has seen these things before going beneath the earth." What vision transformed humanity's greatest fear into peaceful acceptance? What knowledge made philosophers confident about crossing death's threshold? The initiates knew. 3,000 every September for 2,000 years. Millions total across the centuries. And not one broke their oath completely. Fragments survive, tantalizing hints. But the core secret, the actual revelation that occurred in the telesterion's darkness, remains unknown. The silence itself is the mystery's loudest testament. What truth is worth protecting for 2 millennia? What knowledge demands such absolute secrecy that even the dying kept it hidden? The telesterion stands in ruins now. The ceremonies ended 16 centuries ago. But somewhere in the archaeological record, in symbols and fragments and negative space, the answer waits. The Homeric hymn to Demeter preserves the recipe. Barley, water, mint, simple, agricultural, appropriate for mysteries centered on grain goddess. Scholars accepted this for centuries. Then in 1978, 3 researchers published a theory that changed everything. Gordon Wasson, Albert Hoffman, and Carl Ruck proposed something radical. The barley was infected with ergot, natural LSD precursor. The kykeon wasn't just ritual drink, it was psychedelic sacrament. The controversy exploded. Classicists rejected the theory, too speculative, too dependent on modern drug culture projecting backward. But the chemical evidence was undeniable. Ergot grows naturally on barley, contains ergotamine alkaloids. Properly prepared, these compounds produce effects remarkably similar to LSD. Visions, ego dissolution, mystical experiences, exactly what initiates described. The foundation of Western philosophy may have been laid by men who had glimpsed eternity through sacred chemistry. Ancient descriptions support this. Initiates reported seeing the Great Light, experiencing birth in fire, encountering the gods face to face. These aren't metaphors. They're phenomenological descriptions of psychedelic experience, the sudden visual brilliance, the sense of cosmic rebirth, the presence of entities perceived as divine. Modern psychedelic research documents identical effects. But it wasn't just chemistry. The ritual context mattered. Fasting for 9 days, sleep deprivation, sensory isolation, the long walk from Athens, all designed to make consciousness vulnerable, permeable, ready for transformation. The kykeon was catalyst. The ritual was the container. Together they created reliable mystical experience. The Eleusinian priesthood guarded kykeon preparation. Specific families, the Eumolpids and Kerykes, held hereditary rites, generation after generation passing down the exact techniques, harvest timing, processing methods, storage conditions, dosage calculations. This wasn't primitive superstition. It was sophisticated pharmacology, ensuring consistent effects, avoiding toxic overdose, maximizing visionary potential. Alternative theories exist. Some scholars propose the kykeon was entirely symbolic, the transformation purely psychological, created through expectation, theatre, and ritual rather than chemistry. Others suggest hypnotic techniques, mass suggestion in the darkness of the telesterion, 3,000 people in heightened suggestible states, primed for profound experience. The truth might combine all elements: chemistry enhancing psychology, theatre supporting altered states, ritual providing framework for interpreting overwhelming experience. The ancient mysteries understood something modern culture forgot. Set and setting matter as much as substance. Context transforms pharmacology into theology. Modern experiments with ergot alkaloids have produced remarkable results. Participants describe experiences matching ancient accounts: ego death, cosmic unity, encounters with divine presence, loss of death, fear that persists months afterward. The Eleusinian transformation can be reproduced. Not perfectly. The ritual context is lost, but the core psychedelic experience remains accessible. The implications disturb comfortable narratives. Western philosophy's foundations: Platonic idealism, Socratic wisdom, Aristotelian ethics, all developed by men who'd undergone psychedelic initiation at Eleusis. Their transcendent visions weren't abstract speculation. They were remembered experience, attempting to describe in philosophical language what they'd directly perceived in altered states. The mysteries democratized mysticism. You didn't need years of meditation, extreme asceticism, special birth, just sincere devotion and willingness to drink the kykeon. Instant enlightenment. Chemical gnosis. 3,000 people simultaneously experiencing what mystics pursue through decades of practice. That's why it lasted 2,000 years. The mysteries worked, consistently, reliably. Every initiate received genuine transformation. Not everyone interpreted it identically, but everyone experienced something profound enough to change their relationship with death. Until Christianity closed the sanctuary and lost the recipe. The last kykeon was brewed around 400 CE. The knowledge died with the final priests. Or did it? Hermetic traditions claim continuous transmission. Secret societies whisper about preserved recipes. Modern researchers attempt reconstruction. The goddess's drink might not be lost, just waiting for the world to be ready to receive it again. Midnight in the telesterion. 3,000 initiates sitting in absolute darkness. The kykeon consumed hours ago. Consciousness now fully altered. Boundaries between self and other dissolving. Fear and anticipation building to unbearable intensity. Then it happens. Light. Not gradual illumination. Sudden. Blinding. Overwhelming. The ancient writers describe it consistently. The midnight sun. Radiance where darkness should be. Impossible brilliance that reveals impossible things. In a single moment of blazing revelation, 3,000 souls witnessed something that transformed death from humanity's greatest fear into its greatest gift. Archaeological evidence reveals how this was achieved. The telesterion had a roof structure allowing controlled light, underground passages for dramatic entrances, acoustic properties that amplified sound and created supernatural resonance. Ancient theatre technology at its most sophisticated. The building itself was stage machinery, designed to produce overwhelming sensory experience. The Hierophant appeared in this blazing light, the high priest, wearing elaborate costume, holding sacred objects that only initiates could see. What objects? The sources hint. An ear of grain, reaped in silence, held aloft in the light, symbolic of Persephone rising from underworld, of life emerging from death, of harvest following winter. But was it just symbolism? Or did the Kykion altered consciousness perceive something more? Did the grain become Persephone herself? Did symbolic representation transform into divine presence? Psychedelic consciousness doesn't distinguish between symbol and reality. Metaphor becomes literal. Abstract concepts manifest as perceptible entities. Initiates described the Great Birth. Some scholars interpret this as displaying an infant, the Hierophant holding up a divine child. Dionysus, reborn from Persephone. The mystery of generation. Life's continuity despite individual death. Others suggest obscene elements. The sacred phallus revealed. Generative power displayed. Sexuality as cosmic force. Life emerging from union. The visions went deeper. Apuleius described traveling through all elements, journeying to the underworld, meeting the gods below and above. This wasn't metaphor. In psychedelic states, consciousness can experience itself moving through spaces that feel completely real, encountering entities that feel genuinely divine, accessing knowledge that seems to come from beyond normal awareness. The moment of epoptia, becoming an epoptes, one who has seen. This was the final revelation. What initiates saw remains unknown, but its effects were documented. Permanent reduction in death anxiety, increased sense of cosmic meaning, conviction that consciousness transcends physical death. These aren't vague spiritual feelings. They're measurable psychological changes that persisted for life. Some initiates died during ceremonies. The sources mention this. Were they overwhelmed? Did fragile hearts fail under psychological intensity? Did some succumb to Kykion toxicity? Or did they achieve ultimate transformation, dying in the moment of revelation, transitioning directly from earthly initiation to actual death, never having to leave the vision, becoming epoptai forever? The telesterion's acoustics created another element. 3,000 people experiencing identical visions simultaneously, gasping, weeping, crying out. The collective response amplified individual experience. Confirmation through consensus. Everyone seeing the same impossible things, making the experience undeniably real. Then, silence. The light extinguished. Darkness returning. But initiates knew darkness differently now. Knew it contained light. Knew death contained life. Knew the visible world was temporary mask over eternal reality. They emerged at dawn, transformed, unable to speak about what they'd seen, unable to forget it, carrying for the rest of their lives the knowledge that death was passage, not ending. Not annihilation, just transition to something they'd already glimpsed. The initiate would make a subtle gesture, touch their ear in a specific way, arrange their toga with particular fold, use a password that sounded like ordinary conversation, and across the room, another initiate would recognize the sign. Two strangers suddenly bound by shared experience, part of invisible networks spanning the ancient world. Eleusinian initiation created spiritual aristocracy. The Mystai, those who'd been initiated into basic mysteries. The Epoptai, those who'd achieved the higher revelation. Recognition between grades happened through coded signals invisible to outsiders, secret handshakes before Freemasonry, conspiracy of the blessed hiding in plain sight. The bonds transcended politics. During the Peloponnesian War, Athens and Sparta slaughtered each other, but initiates from both sides met peacefully during the annual ceremonies. Religious truce, sacred neutrality. The mysteries were more important than military victory, more real than political divisions. Some scholars suggest peace negotiations actually occurred at Eleusis, initiated generals on both sides meeting during ceremonies, using shared religious experience as diplomatic foundation. Alcibiades' scandal proved how seriously Athens took this. The brilliant general allegedly profaned the mysteries at a private party, performed the rituals, showed sacred objects, violated the secrecy. Athens recalled him from Sicily campaign, demanded trial. He fled instead. The city would rather lose its most capable general than tolerate mystery violation. That's how essential Eleusis was to Athenian identity. The barbarians destroyed the sanctuary, but initiates claimed the real mystery had already been safely hidden where no sword could reach. Roman emperors understood Eleusis' power. Augustus was initiated, so was Hadrian. Marcus Aurelius delayed military campaigns to attend ceremonies. The mysteries granted legitimacy, spiritual authority, connection to traditions older than Rome itself, but also created vulnerability. Emperors initiated at Eleusis couldn't simply ignore initiates' concerns. Shared religious experience created reciprocal obligations. The initiates developed mutual aid networks, burial societies, economic cooperatives. If an initiate died far from home, other initiates ensured proper funeral. Business dealings between initiates operated on trust, impossible with non-initiates. Marriage preferences favored fellow mistai. The mysteries created parallel social structure based on spiritual rather than blood kinship. Funeral inscriptions reveal the pattern. Initiates buried with specific symbols. References to having seen. 2. Blessed afterlife. 2. Joining the company of the divine. Non-initiates got standard epitaphs. Death as ending. Loss. Sorrow. But initiates faced death with remarkable equanimity. Their tombstones read like celebrations, not because they welcomed death, because they knew what came after. Early Christianity competed directly with this. The apostles offered similar promises: eternal life, resurrection, blessed afterlife for believers. They recruited from the same demographic: spiritual seekers, those anxious about death, those looking for meaning beyond material existence. Church fathers were often former mystery initiates. They knew the competition, knew what they were replacing. Many converts transitioned seamlessly. The language was different. The theology shifted, but the core promise remained: transformation, rebirth, conquest of death. Christianity succeeded partly by offering what Eleusis offered, but without the annual pilgrimage, without the hereditary priesthood, without the Greek cultural context. Portable mysteries, universal access, revolutionary packaging for eternal truths. When Alaric's Goths destroyed the sanctuary in 396 CE, 2,000 years of continuous tradition ended. The last hierophant fell silent. The final kykeon was brewed. The priests sealed underground chambers, hid sacred objects, encrypted the knowledge one last time. But initiates smiled in the ruins, because what they'd learned wasn't in the building, wasn't in the objects, wasn't in the ceremonies. It was in consciousness itself, in direct experience that transcended external forms. The temples could burn, the priests could die, but the vision endured, hidden in minds, passed through dreams, waiting for the world to ask the right questions again. The Sibylline books never lied. When Rome consulted them during the darkest hour of the Hannibalic War, the prophecy was clear. Only Magna Mater, the Great Mother, could save the city. But the Great Mother wasn't Roman. She was Cybele of Pessinus, ancient beyond calculation, worshipped since before civilizations rose. Her priests had mutilated themselves in her service. Her rituals involved blood and ecstasy and violations of everything Rome claimed to value. The Senate voted anyway. Desperation trumped dignity. The procession arrived in 204 BCE. The black meteorite that embodied the goddess carried on a golden ship up the Tiber, drums and cymbals announcing her presence, and walking beside the stone, the galley. Cybele's castrated priests, wearing flowing robes, makeup and jewelry, hair long and perfumed, dancing with movements no Roman man would dare, voices high and strange, neither male nor female, something other, something that made Roman spectators look away in discomfort and fascination. Rome invited a goddess into its heart, who demanded men destroy their manhood in ecstatic devotion, and thousands eagerly complied. Cybele represented everything Rome feared: primordial femininity, the devouring mother, the earth that births life then consumes it. She predated male gods, predated civilization itself, predated the order that Rome worked so hard to maintain. She was chaos, nature, the wild forces that agriculture and law tried to control. Her mythology explained her nature. Attis, her beloved, young, beautiful. She obsessed over him, loved him with divine intensity, but he betrayed her, fell in love with a mortal woman. Cybele's rage was absolute. She drove him mad. He fled to the mountains, and there, in divine frenzy, he castrated himself with a sharp stone. His blood fed the earth. His severed genitals became sacred offerings. He died of the wound, then transformed, became the evergreen pine, immortal through mutilation. The galley priests reenacted this myth, not symbolically, literally. On the Day of Blood, each March, young men worked themselves into religious frenzy. Drums and dancing and sleeplessness, and probably drugs, building to crescendo. Then the Archigallus, the high priest, would castrate himself before the altar, using a sacred blade or sharp stone in imitation of Attis, blood pouring down, the crowd watching in horror and awe. And others would follow, seized by divine madness, grabbed the blades, performed the same mutilation, men destroying their own manhood, throwing the severed pieces onto Cybele's altar, offering their masculinity to the goddess, becoming neither man nor woman, becoming Galli, becoming priests of the Great Mother. Roman law tried to contain this. Citizens couldn't become Galli, only foreigners could serve Cybele in this way. The goddess could stay, but Rome's own men were protected from themselves, from the impulse towards self-destruction that the goddess inspired. Yet the law failed. Roman men did join, did castrate themselves, did transform into these otherworldly creatures that haunted the goddess's temple. Medical examination of preserved Galli remains shows they sometimes survived, lived for decades after castration. The priests possessed sophisticated knowledge, how to control bleeding, prevent infection, care for mutilated bodies. This wasn't crude barbarism. It was ritualized surgery, practiced for generations, refined to minimize death even while maximizing transformation. The goddess demanded ultimate sacrifice, and her devotees gave it willingly. Because beyond the pain, beyond the social death, beyond the destruction of male identity, they found something, some union with divine feminine, some release from the burden of masculine performance, some transformation into beings that didn't fit human categories. Cybele didn't just accept offerings. She demanded humans destroy themselves to become worthy of her love. March 24th. The festival of Cybele reaches its terrible climax. The entire week has built toward this moment. On the 15th, priests cut a pine tree, carried it into the temple like a corpse. The tree is Attis, dead but ready for resurrection. They wrap it in wool, decorate with violets, mourn the dying god while knowing he'll return. The days between are preparation, fasting, purification, building psychological tension. Sleep deprivation weakens rational control. Constant ritual activity prevents normal thought patterns. The initiates are being broken down, reshaped, made ready for transformation. Then comes March 24th, Dies Sanguinis, the Day of Blood. On this day each year, the streets of Rome ran red with the blood of men who chose to become something other than human. It begins with music, drums pounding incessantly, cymbals crashing, flutes wailing in discordant modes. Not music meant to please, music meant to invade, to bypass conscious thought, to speak directly to the limbic system, to trigger fight or flight responses that have nowhere to go except into religious frenzy. The dancing intensifies, spinning, whirling, bodies pushed beyond normal endurance. Exhaustion becomes exhilaration, pain becomes pleasure. The boundaries between sensation types dissolve. Blood rushes to the skin, hearts pound, breath comes in gasps, every nerve ending alive, raw, vulnerable. The galley priests lead the way, already castrated, already transformed. They dance with frenzied abandon, flagellating themselves, cutting their arms, blood flowing freely, offering their pain to the goddess, showing devotees what's required, what's possible, what's necessary. New initiates watch, feel the contagion, the madness spreading like fire through dry grass. Some came planning this, preparing for years. Others are swept up spontaneously, seized by something they don't recognize, something that wasn't there yesterday, something the goddess awakened through ritual technology, refined over millennia. The Archigallus steps forward, the high priest. He holds the sacred blade, or maybe sharp stone like Attis used. The moment has arrived. The entire festival has been preparing for this. He reaches down, grasps his genitals, and severs them completely. Blood sprays. The crowd gasps. He holds the severed parts aloft, offers them to the goddess, places them on her altar. His face shows not agony but ecstasy. Others follow. The contagion takes hold. Young men rushing forward, grabbing blades, knives, stones, whatever implements the priests prepared. The mutilation happens quickly. Shock provides brief anesthesia. The pain comes later, but in the moment there's only divine madness, only the overwhelming need to give this offering, to complete the sacrifice, to become what the goddess demands. The blood pools, runs down temple steps, stains the stone. The goddess drinks, accepts the offerings, transforms these men into her priests, her neither male nor female servants, her galley. Medical texts from the period describe the aftermath. Most died within days. Infection, blood loss, shock. The mortality rate was horrific, but survivors became priests, gained status, authority, divine identity. They'd crossed a threshold that couldn't be recrossed. They existed beyond normal human categories. Neither living nor dead, neither male nor female, neither human nor divine. Something else, something sacred and disturbing and powerful. Modern psychologists struggle to explain this behavior. Mass hysteria, temporary psychosis induced by sensory overload, extreme group conformity. But these explanations feel inadequate. They describe mechanism without addressing meaning. Why did these men want this? What did they gain that seemed worth such ultimate sacrifice? The galley claimed they found freedom, liberation from sexual desire, from masculine performance, from the endless exhausting work of being male in Rome's hypermasculine culture. They became brides of the goddess, divine hermaphrodites, living bridges between male and female, human and divine, mortal and immortal. The day of blood ended. The festival continued. 3 days later, Attis resurrected. The joy of return. The promise that death isn't final. That transformation is possible. That sacrifice leads to something beyond suffering. But the bloodstains remained, and the new galley priests bore scars that never healed. The Taurobolium required wealth, enormous wealth, a bull, the construction of a special pit, priests to perform the ceremony, days of preparation, ritual purity requirements. This wasn't mystery available to common people. This was exclusive transformation for elites who could afford divine rebirth. The pit was deep, 10 feet perhaps, stone-lined, large enough for a man to stand. Above, a wooden platform with holes drilled throughout, large holes, enough for liquid to pour freely. The initiate descended, naked, stood in darkness, waited. Above, they brought the bull, massive, strong, adorned with flowers and ribbons, led to position directly over the pit. The priests chanted prayers in languages older than Latin, invoking Cybele, invoking Attis, invoking forces of death and life, calling down divine presence into the sacrifice. The blade strikes. The bull's throat opens. Hot blood gushes, pours through the platform holes, falls like rain onto the initiate below. To be reborn eternal, you had to drown in the blood of the cosmic bull while still breathing. Imagine standing in that pit. The first drops strike your head, warm, wet, the smell overwhelming, copper, iron, life essence, then the deluge, blood cascading down, covering your face, filling your mouth, choking, drowning. You gasp for air and inhale blood. Your eyes burn, your skin is soaked, the pit fills ankle deep. You stand in pooled blood, while more pours endlessly from above. The psychological impact is unimaginable. Terror, disgust, primal revulsion at being covered in death, but also transformation. The warm blood feels like being in a womb, like returning to pre-birth existence, like dissolving boundaries between life and death. You're being unmade, broken down, prepared for reconstruction as something new. The bull dies. The blood flow slows, stops. You stand in the pit, drenched, transformed. The priests chant above. You climb out, emerge, born from blood. The witnesses gasp. You're crimson, unrecognizable, a walking embodiment of death and life combined. They don't let you wash. The blood-stained clothing becomes sacred relic, worn in processions, displayed as proof of rebirth. The blood itself contains power, divine essence transmitted through sacrifice. Inscriptions describe initiates as reborn for eternity through the Taurobolium. Not symbolic rebirth, actual immortality. The bull's death substituted for their death. Blood magic at its most literal. The ritual evolved. Earlier versions might have used simpler forms. Later versions grew elaborate. By the imperial period, multiple bulls might be sacrificed, or other animals added, rams, goats, layers of blood, multiple rebirths. Aristocrats competed over who could afford the most expensive Taurobolium. Status religion. But also genuine belief that this worked, that divine immortality could be purchased through costly sacrifice. Some emperors underwent the Taurobolium. The inscriptions prove it. Rulers convinced that bull's blood granted them divine regeneration, extended reign, protection from enemies, immortal soul. The ceremony merged political power with religious transformation, made emperors into living gods through blood baptism. Christianity saw demonic parody. Christ's blood offered freely, no expensive ceremony required, just faith. The Taurobolium required wealth and blood and violence. Christian baptism required only water and confession, democratized salvation, made rebirth accessible. But something was lost. The visceral power, the physical transformation, the overwhelming sensory experience that made Taurobolium undeniably real. Standing in a pit being drenched in bull's blood wasn't metaphor, wasn't symbol, was actual physical ordeal that transformed consciousness through trauma. The last recorded Taurobolium occurred in the 4th century. The practice ended with paganism's collapse, but the idea survived. Blood as transformative power, death leading to rebirth, sacrifice creating immortality. These concepts transcended the specific ritual, and somewhere in the archaeological record, sealed pits wait, still stained with blood shed for eternal life. But why? Why castration? Why blood? Why such extreme devotion to a goddess who demanded mutilation? The mythology provides answers. Attis wasn't just a dying god. He represented the soul's liberation from physical existence. His castration symbolized cutting away material desire, freeing consciousness from flesh. His transformation into the evergreen pine represented immortality achieved through sacrificing mortal identity. The Gali priests understood this at levels deeper than symbol. Their castration wasn't self-mutilation, it was self-transcendence. By destroying the source of sexual desire, they claimed to escape the most powerful chain binding humans to material existence. No longer driven by lust, no longer enslaved to reproduction's demands, free to exist in liminal space between genders, between human and divine. The priests claimed their castration didn't diminish them, it transformed them into living portals between the worlds. Inscriptions describe the Gali's special abilities: prophecy, healing, speaking with divine voices. They existed outside normal society, which granted them abnormal powers. They could see what others couldn't, know what others didn't, bridge realms that others couldn't access. Their mutilated bodies became sacred instruments, antennas tuned to frequencies normal humans couldn't receive. The secret teachings went deeper. Cybele and Attis represented cosmic principles, feminine creative chaos and masculine ordering force. Their union created the universe. Attis's castration represented the sacrifice required for creation, destroying himself to birth something new. The Gali reenacted this cosmic drama, became participants in creation itself. Each castration repeated the primordial act that made existence possible. Mystical texts hint at sexual elements that sources won't describe explicitly. The marriage of Attis, celebrated in private ceremonies. Did Gali priests engage in sacred sexuality despite castration? Some evidence suggests yes. Castration didn't eliminate all sexual function. Arousal might still occur. Orgasm through other means remained possible. But freed from reproductive purpose, sexuality became purely spiritual, purely devotional, purely a means of union with the goddess. This terrified Roman authorities. Sexuality that served no practical purpose, that existed only for divine connection, that violated nature's categories, male bodies performing female roles, female-identified beings with male histories. The Gali were transgender before the concept existed, existing in gender categories Rome had no language for. Early Christianity absorbed Cybele's influence despite condemning her. The Virgin Mother, the dying and resurrected God, the promise of immortality through divine sacrifice, all echoed Cybele and Attis. Even the liturgical year, Christmas falling near the winter solstice, Easter near the spring equinox. These were Cybele's festival dates. Christianity kept the structure, changed the names, sanitized the practices. But it lost something crucial: the embodied transformation, the physical ordeal, the absolute commitment that castration demanded. Christian monks practiced celibacy, but they didn't sacrifice their genitals. They denied sexuality through willpower. The Gali ended sexuality through surgery. No possibility of backsliding, no temptation, no failure. Ultimate commitment. Julian the Apostate attempted to revive Cybele's mysteries in the 362 CE, the last pagan emperor. He saw in the Great Mother a counter to Christianity, a tradition older and deeper. But it was too late. Christianity had won. The Taurobolium couldn't compete with baptism. Blood sacrifice couldn't match the promise of a single divine death sufficient for all humanity. The last Gali died. The temples closed. The practices ended, but the goddess waits. The Great Mother preceded human civilization. She'll survive its collapse, and when order breaks down, when civilizations fall, when human categories dissolve, she'll return, demanding sacrifice, demanding transformation, demanding men become something other than men to serve her purposes. The goddess who castrates gods never truly dies. She just sleeps between ages. Step inside a Mithraeum in any corner of the Roman Empire and look up. The ceiling isn't random decoration. It's a star map. Every constellation positioned precisely. Every celestial body placed with mathematical exactness corresponding to how they appeared on specific nights in the ancient sky. The Mithraea weren't just religious buildings. They were observatories, cosmic models, three-dimensional teaching tools designed to show initiates the structure of heaven itself. For centuries, scholars dismissed the astronomical elements as symbolic, pretty decorations, cultural context. But recent computer modeling changed everything. When researchers input ancient star positions and traced how the constellations moved across millennia through precession, something extraordinary emerged. The tauroctony, that central image repeated in every Mithraeum, from Scotland to Syria, depicted a specific astronomical moment. The exact configuration of celestial bodies at the precise instant when the spring equinox moved from the constellation of Taurus into Aries. One cosmic age ending, another beginning. A moment that occurred around 2,000 years before Mithraism spread across Rome. Ancient knowledge preserved in religious form. Sacred history encoded in sacred geometry. But why did this matter so intensely? Why did Mithraic priests across the empire maintain identical ceiling designs matching skies from an epoch their religion hadn't even existed? The answer reveals something deeper about how Mithraism worked. Initiates learned that human souls descended through planetary spheres to incarnate in physical bodies. 7 spheres corresponding to 7 planetary governors. Each one a gate, each one controlled by a different cosmic force. When you died, you had to navigate back through those gates, ascending, remembering, speaking passwords that each planetary ruler demanded. Without correct knowledge, the soul would be trapped, reincarnated again, forced to repeat the cycle of imprisonment in flesh. Mithraic initiation was cartography for the afterlife. Each grade corresponded to one planetary sphere. At each grade, initiates learned the name of that sphere's ruler, learned the correct formula to speak when approaching that gate, learned the secret signs. The cosmic map on the Mithraeum ceiling became practical navigational tool, something you studied, memorized, carried in memory through death itself. Like sailors memorizing constellations before sailing unknown seas, initiates memorized the celestial geography before navigating the final voyage. The 7 gates weren't arbitrary. They reflected actual astronomical knowledge. The planetary spheres in order of distance from Earth corresponded to planetary distances modern astronomy would confirm centuries later. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and above them both, the fixed stars, the unmoved mover, the ultimate destination where the soul finally achieved liberation from cosmic mechanism. This cosmology gave initiates something Christianity could never offer: control, agency, knowledge-based salvation. By learning the right formulas, speaking the right names, remembering the celestial map correctly, you could direct your own soul's journey. You weren't dependent on priests, weren't waiting for external divine mercy. You possessed gnosis, secret knowledge, techniques that worked regardless of moral worthiness or social status or priestly approval. The cosmos had rules. Learn the rules, follow the rules, achieve immortality. The initiates believed they possessed the celestial map that would guide their souls through the planetary gates after death. They descend into artificial caves to look at painted skies. They studied configurations of stars that changed across ages. They committed to memory the passwords for each celestial threshold. And they died knowing exactly where they were going, knowing how to get there, knowing that their preparation in Mithraeum chambers had transformed them into celestial navigators, ready to steer through cosmic waters toward liberation itself. But Mithraism taught something that both pagan Rome and rising Christianity found deeply unsettling. A theology so radical it suggested the universe itself was fundamentally divided, not controlled by a single benevolent God, not ordered by Jupiter's will or divine providence. Instead, existence was a battlefield, an eternal struggle between equally matched forces of absolute light and absolute darkness, order and chaos, creation and destruction, and this war would never end. This wasn't imported from Persian Zoroastrianism accidentally. Initiates deliberately studied the dualistic system. They learned that two supreme principles existed since before time: Ahura Mazda, the principle of light, wisdom, and cosmic order, and Ahriman, the principle of darkness, ignorance, and cosmic chaos. These forces didn't represent good and evil in moral terms. They represented the fundamental structure of existence itself. Every atom of the universe contained both principles. Every event was their interaction. Every moment was their ongoing negotiation. Traditional Roman religion proposed hierarchy. Jupiter ruled. Other gods obeyed or rebelled but ultimately accepted cosmic order. Christianity would propose something similar: one God, omnipotent, omniscient. Evil existed only as rebellion against divine will, but Mithraism proposed equality. The forces of light and darkness remained perfectly balanced. Neither could destroy the other. Neither wanted to. Their eternal conflict was the universe's engine. Remove one, and existence collapsed into stasis. Humans weren't passive observers of this cosmic war. They were soldiers. Every moral choice was a battle. Every virtuous act strengthened the forces of light. Every vice empowered darkness. Life became cosmic warfare. Not metaphorically, literally. When you resisted temptation, you were striking a blow against Ahriman. When you practiced courage, you channeled Ahura Mazda's power. Your consciousness became battlefield. Your will became weapon. Your choices rippled through celestial spheres. While Christians preached one God's victory over evil, Mithras knew the war would never end, and they had chosen their side. This created permanent, existential tension. You couldn't relax, couldn't assume good would inevitably triumph, couldn't trust that cosmic justice would eventually right all wrongs. The darkness was as real and powerful as the light. It wasn't going away, so you fought, always. Without hope of final victory, only commitment to standing against the darkness anyway. The archons controlled the planetary spheres. Each archon represented a different force, some aligned more with light, others with darkness, but all were ultimately servants of cosmic mechanics. They weren't moral judges, they were impersonal forces. This stripped away comforting illusions. The universe didn't care about your suffering or your virtue. It was mechanical, indifferent. The only meaning came from conscious choice to ally yourself with light against the darkness. Initiates learned specific meditations on this, visualizing themselves descending through darkness toward light below, visualizing themselves ascending through light toward ultimate light above. Consciousness as particle of divine light, temporarily trapped in material darkness. The goal was liberation, escape from the mechanism, ascension beyond the archons, achievement of gnosis that freed you from being merely a piece in the cosmic game. But before liberation, you fought, you struggled, you remained vigilant, because darkness wasn't going away. The war continued, and soldiers never truly rested. The doctrine terrified both Rome's traditionalists and Christianity's evangelists. It offered no easy salvation, no guarantee of triumph. Only eternal struggle in service to light while knowing darkness would persist until the universe itself ended. The accusations came from Christian polemicists who'd heard testimony from apostates, from ex-initiates willing to break their oaths. The stories were consistent enough across sources to suggest something more than propaganda. Initiates, they claimed, were forced to participate in ritualized murder. New candidates would be blindfolded, led into chambers, given something warm and liquid to drink, told it was wine, then commanded to kill. A figure would be presented, bound, helpless. The blindfolded initiate would be given a blade and ordered to strike. The victim would cry out. Blood would flow. The initiate would understand, in that moment of horror, what they'd done. The blindfold would come off. The shock would hit. They'd committed murder. Or so they believed. The victim would be alive, of course. The whole thing theatre. But the psychological impact was absolute. They'd crossed a line. Become something different. Become someone who could kill. Someone who'd chosen violence in service to Mithras. Someone who'd mixed their blood with a victim's blood in covenant. The oath of silence wasn't just about keeping secrets euro. It was about sharing guilt that could never be confessed. Whether actual human sacrifice occurred remains controversial among scholars. The physical evidence is ambiguous. Some Mithraea contain human remains, but these could be from later burials, from other purposes. The bones don't prove ritual murder, yet the literary testimony from early sources is disturbing in its consistency. The detail level, the matter-of-fact description, as though this were accepted knowledge about Mithraism. Archaeological evidence of ritualized violence does exist. Cursed tablets recovered from Mithraic sites contain references to the necessary death and the one who volunteers. These could be metaphorical. Spiritual death, ego death, symbolic sacrifice. But they could also be literal. The phrasing suggests someone actually died. The tablets were offerings, prayers, binding spells, the language of magic, not philosophy. Some scholars propose that the highest grades of Mithraic initiation involved ritual warfare, not actual combat, but staged battles, initiates playing roles, gods and demons, light forces and dark forces. The enactment would escalate, become increasingly violent, participants would be injured, blood would flow. The line between theatrical performance and actual violence would blur. By the ceremony's end, initiates wouldn't know if they'd genuinely harmed someone or if it was all controlled simulation. The magic papyri recovered from Egypt suggest Mithraists practiced curse magic, using the names of planetary archons, using formulas believed to compel obedience, using blood as binding agent. Curse tablets describe enemies being targeted, being destroyed, sometimes through supernatural means, sometimes through more practical methods. Did Mithraic communities engage in ritual magic to eliminate threats, to punish apostates, to enforce the oath of silence? The evidence suggests yes, at least in some communities, at least in some periods. Not universal, not systematized, but real. Voluntary human sacrifice might have occurred, prisoners of war offered, slaves volunteered through coercion. The blood covenant explaining how someone bound themselves to the god. By participating in sacred murder, you merged your identity with Mithras himself, became extension of cosmic violence, became instrument of light fighting darkness. The theory remains speculative, but it explains why the oath was unbreakable, why initiates maintained silence through torture, why the Romans feared Mithraism enough to eventually systematically destroy it. If the Brotherhood was willing to murder to protect secrets, they became genuinely dangerous. Not just spiritually threatening, physically threatening. The Mithraea couldn't have survived for 300 years if authorities knew they were sites of actual human sacrifice. So either the accusations were exaggerated propaganda, or the sacrifices were so carefully concealed that archaeological evidence never emerged, or they occurred rarely enough that Roman authorities never obtained concrete proof. The truth waits in silence, protected by the same oath that protected initiates 2,000 years ago. The last dated Mithraic inscription, comes from 407 CE, a soldier on the Rhine frontier making offering to the god. By this point, Mithraism was already dead in the empire's heart. Rome had converted. Christianity was law. The emperor was Christian. The legions were being Christianized. Yet on the frontier, in the cold darkness, soldiers still descended into Mithraea, still performed mysteries their grandfathers had taught them, still believed in the god who'd sustained them through decades of warfare and death. But belief wasn't enough anymore. The political ground had shifted beneath their feet. Constantine's conversion wasn't spontaneous spiritual revelation. It was strategic. He understood that Mithraism controlled the military, that centurions answered to pater priests before they answered to him, that legions had parallel loyalty structures he couldn't penetrate. Christianity offered something Mithraism couldn't: universal appeal. Women could join, slaves could hold authority, the poor had equal access. Mithraism's rigid hierarchy and military exclusivity made it powerful but brittle. Christianity's open arms made it unstoppable. The soldier's god promised cosmic victory, but couldn't even save his own temples from destruction. Archaeological evidence reveals the transition's violence. Mithraea sealed deliberately, sometimes reverently. Sacred objects carefully hidden, altars smashed but not by Christian mobs, by the initiates themselves, as if they knew this wasn't the end, just dormancy, waiting for better times. Other Mithraea destroyed violently, desecrated. The contrast is telling. Some communities abandoned their god peacefully. Others clung longer, resisted, tried to protect what they'd held sacred. Military records from the 4th century show the tension explicitly. Officers forced to choose, convert to Christianity or lose advancement. Soldiers choosing between God and career. Most chose career. Christianity offered legitimacy, imperial sanction, power. Mithras offered only faithfulness to something being systematically erased. Some legions maintained Mithraic practice deep into the 5th century, on the frontier, in remote forts, where Roman authority weakened, where the old ways held longer, but it was rearguard action, retreat. The god who'd conquered from Britannia to the Euphrates couldn't survive one emperor's political decision. The mysteries survived, though, not openly. The knowledge went underground. Military orders absorbed Mithraic elements, hierarchical grades, initiation rituals, secret oaths. The Knights Templar centuries later would carry Mithraic echoes. Hermetic traditions would preserve Mithraic theology. The mysteries didn't die. They transformed, hid, waited in coded symbols and secret societies for better times. Some scholars suggest Constantine's own conversion was influenced by Mithraic theology, that the experience he described as Christ's vision might have been something else. Cosmic revelation, precession knowledge, the god speaking in new language, converting an initiated emperor from one form of gnosis to another. But this remains speculation. What's certain is that Mithraism collapsed not through intellectual defeat but through political power, one man's decision cascading through the empire's hierarchy. The mysteries were too dependent on military structures. When military structures changed, the god fell. The Mithraea stand in ruins now, sacred objects in museums, inscriptions studied in universities, the theology preserved in scholarly articles. But the living tradition ended. The ceremonies stopped. The soldiers stopped descending into darkness to meet their god. Yet the symbols survived. In military insignia, in fraternal orders, in esoteric traditions, the cosmic war between light and darkness continued. The planetary gates remained in hermetic teaching. The god's death marked only transformation. The mysteries learned to survive by ceasing to exist in forms observers could recognize. The temples were destroyed, the god forgotten. But the initiates smiled, knowing something Christianity would take centuries to understand, that conquest through force always fails. Only that which transforms itself survives forever. Orpheus wasn't just a musician whose lyre could move stones. He was a spiritual pioneer who mapped the territory between worlds. He descended to the underworld not to rescue Eurydice, though that's how the myth frames it. That was the story for outsiders. The real reason was darker, more ambitious, more impossible. He went to the underworld to bring back knowledge, to learn the geography of death, to obtain instructions for living humans on how to navigate the realm they'd eventually inhabit forever. The Orphic gold tablets are among the strangest religious artifacts ever discovered. Thin sheets of gold, no bigger than a playing card, buried with initiates across the Mediterranean. They're maps. Literally. Instructions for navigating the underworld after death. Precise directions. Which rivers to drink from, which to avoid, what to say to the guardians at each gate, how to recognize the paths that lead to eternal reward versus those leading to reincarnation. One tablet reads, "I am parched and perishing, but give me water from the spring that flows from the lake of Mnemosyne, then I shall know all things." Another, "Tell the gatekeepers, I am a child of the earth and starry heaven, but my race is from heaven alone. You know this yourselves, and I know it too." These weren't vague poetic sentiments. They were passwords, actual phrases to speak, actions to perform, knowledge to possess. The tablets suggest that Orphic theology had solved a profound problem that kept other religions from complete answers. Death wasn't end, but transition. And transitions could be navigated successfully if you possessed correct information. Like learning the language before traveling to a foreign country. Master the underworld's language before arriving there permanently. Orpheus returned from death with a mappa euro, and for the right price and purity, he would share the route to immortality. The myth itself encodes this mission. Orpheus goes to Hades, sings so beautifully that even the king of death is moved. Hades grants permission for Eurydice to return, but with one condition: don't look back, don't question, just trust. Orpheus leads her toward life, toward light, toward resurrection, but at the threshold, doubt strikes. He turns to confirm she's there. She vanishes back into death. For initiates, this meant something crucial. Knowledge alone isn't enough. You must trust in the process. Doubt kills transformation. The instruction is to not look back, to not question, to maintain faith even when you can't see evidence that the technique is working. This mirrors psychedelic experience. The moment you resist the journey, question it, try to control it, you suffer. But surrender, trust, let go, and you experience transcendence. The Orphic gold tablets were the culture's first survival guides for death, ancestor to every religious text claiming to map the afterlife, every mystical manual promising shortcuts, every esoteric tradition claiming secret knowledge about what comes after. Orpheus pioneered the genre, showed that the underworld wasn't random chaos. It had structure, rules, governance, and those who prepared could navigate it successfully. Death became an examination you could study for, a territory you could map, a journey you could rehearse. Instead of terror at the unknown, Orphic teaching offered training. The prospect of arriving in the underworld already knowing the way, already possessing the passwords, already understanding what the guardians would ask. Consciousness could transcend death through preparation, through knowledge, through mystery initiation teaching exactly what you needed to know. Orpheus had made the journey and returned. He was proof it was possible. The central Orphic myth was transgressive, scandalous even to other Greeks. It proposed that humans carried within them something essentially criminal, that we were born tainted, that this taint came from the beginning of time itself. The story: Dionysus was born from Zeus and Persephone, the god's god, pure divine consciousness. The Titans, jealous of his existence, attacked him. They tore him to pieces, consumed his raw flesh, ate the god, committed the ultimate crime: cannibalism, deicide, murder of pure divinity. Then Zeus destroyed the Titans, incinerated them with lightning. But from their ashes, using sacred clay, he formed humans. We are made from the substance of those who ate God. Every human carried within them the flesh of a murdered god Euro, and the curse of their divine cannibalism could only be cleansed through lifetime after lifetime of suffering. This theology created multiple radical implications. First, humans were fundamentally corrupt, not through individual sin, through cosmic inheritance. Our nature itself was crime-stained. We were literally made of evil. This wasn't moral failing. This was ontological fact. Second, redemption became necessary but impossible through single lifetime. You couldn't purify yourself of the titanic nature through simple virtue. You needed cosmic punishment. Reincarnation, the soul entering body after body, suffering through multiple lives, gradually burning away the titanic contamination through accumulated experience. Third, liberation required extreme practices. Orphic communities practiced vegetarianism, avoided wool, abstained from sexual activity during holy periods. The logic was precise. Animals contained consciousness, so eating them meant consuming souls already trapped in flesh. Wool came from animals, so wearing it meant wearing death. Sexual intercourse created new life, perpetuating the cycle of reincarnation. The goal was to live as lightly as possible, consume minimally, reproduce never, eventually achieve such purity that reincarnation became unnecessary. But here's where Orphicism diverged from later ascetic traditions. The suffering wasn't punishment from an angry god, it was therapeutic, necessary medicine. The titanic nature could only be purged through physical experience, through feeling bodies break down, through enduring hunger and cold and aging and disease. Each ordeal burned away more titanic residue. Some wealthy Orphic communities created parallel societies. They maintained separate laws, different customs, economic systems based on spiritual principles, pooled resources, practiced communal living centuries before Christianity invented monasticism. They were trying to create microcosms of purified existence, places where the titanic curse could be actively worked through rather than unconsciously lived. Orphic texts reveal sophistication, philosophical treatises explaining how original sin predated morality, theological interpretations of why a benevolent universe seemed so full of suffering. The answer was clear. We earned it. Through crimes our ancestors committed, through being made of their substance. But redemption was possible. Through knowledge, through initiation, through living strictly enough. Eventually, the soul escaped reincarnation entirely, returned to pre-incarnate existence, achieved henosis with the cosmic mind, became divine again, reclaimed the innocence Dionysus possessed before the Titans tore him apart. The theology influenced Platonism profoundly. The soul's imprisonment in flesh, the need for purification, the possibility of returning to transcendent reality. Greek philosophy inherited Orphic dualism, even when philosophers rejected explicit Orphic theology. The Orphic initiate woke before dawn, descended to a natural spring, cold water, the ritual purification, then fasting. Strict dietary rules for the entire day, no meat, no legumes that grew underground and thus touched death. Only bread and water and certain fruits, the body becoming lighter, more spiritual, less rooted in flesh. The day continued with ritual, prayer, meditation on death, reading Orphic texts, contemplating the gold tablets, imagining the underworld journey. What would you see? What would you hear? What passwords would you need? The mind, rehearsing the transition continuously. Initiates weren't encouraged to find meaning in worldly success. Wealth was irrelevant, status meaningless. Family relationships subordinate to spiritual community. The goal was detachment, to live so thoroughly disconnected from material existence that death would feel like natural continuation rather than catastrophic rupture. Some practices went further. sleep deprivation to induce visionary states, fasting to starvation to trigger ecstatic experiences, rhythmic chanting that induced trance. The body was a tool for consciousness modification. Push it hard enough and it would reveal what lay beneath. To truly live forever, Orphics believed you had to die every day while your body still breathed. This wasn't morbid depression. It was sophisticated spiritual technology. Modern psychology recognizes this. Small daily deaths, letting go of the self, practicing surrender. This creates permanent neurological changes, reduced death anxiety, increased sense of cosmic connection. People who practice this report different relationship with mortality. Archaeological evidence reveals how serious this was. Burial sites of Orphic communities show different positioning than conventional Greek burials. Bodies arranged as if sleeping, positioned to face east, oriented toward resurrection, suggesting these initiates believed they'd wake in the underworld, that their death was truly another sleep leading to another awakening. The Orphic funeral rite reflected this. No elaborate mourning, no extravagant tomb, simple burial with their gold tablet containing the passwords, everything they needed for the journey ahead. Other Orphic initiates gathering to remember the deceased's spiritual achievement, to celebrate that they'd completed their earthwork, that they were beginning the true journey now. Wealthy Orphic women gained unusual independence through this theology. If worldly relationships were meaningless, then marriage was irrelevant. They could pursue spiritual life without male mediation, could study philosophy, could teach, could lead communities of initiates. The goddess Persephone represented divine feminine consciousness in the Orphic system. Women channeling that consciousness had authority that transcended patriarchal restrictions. The lifestyle left no historical trace beyond burial practices and textual references. These were quiet people, not drawing attention, not broadcasting their choices, just living differently, eating differently, relating to others differently, maintaining their initiatic commitments through decades of worldly interaction while internally remaining detached. When death finally came, they didn't fight it, didn't fear it, had already died so many times through practice that the final death was just another transition. They closed their eyes, released their breath, and their consciousness continued the journey it had been rehearsing. The Davani papyrus sits in a museum in Thessaloniki, Greece, the oldest surviving European manuscript, written in the 4th century BCE. It contains an Orphic poem paired with philosophical commentary. The poem describes cosmic creation through divine sexuality, how from primal unity desire emerged. Separation occurred. The universe birthed from sacred intercourse between cosmic principles. This wasn't crude fertility mythology. It was sophisticated metaphysics. Every sexual act in the poem represents a cosmic principle. Creation emerges from conscious union of opposites. The commentary explains this allegorically, shows how sexual symbols map to philosophical truths, demonstrates that Orphic theology operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Literal mythological narrative, psychological allegory, metaphysical principle, each level containing truth accessible to those with eyes to see it. The Davani papyrus survived by accident, wrapped in a funeral pyre, carbonized but preserved. If discovered by someone hostile to these teachings, it would have been destroyed immediately, because multiple religious traditions understood. Orphic knowledge was dangerous, radically transgressive, heretical. Every authority that encountered Orphic texts moved to suppress them. Greek city-states banned certain Orphic practices. Rome expelled Orphic teachers. Christian emperors specifically targeted Orphic manuscripts for destruction. Entire libraries were burned. Every scroll containing Orphic teaching eliminated. The Church Fathers recognized these texts as presenting alternative cosmologies, alternative soteriologies, dangerous wisdom that undermined Christian orthodoxy. The books contained formulas for becoming divine, and they had to be burned. What we know of Orphic teaching comes from fragments, quotes preserved in other authors' critiques, descriptions from enemies, references in later philosophical texts. No complete Orphic scripture survived intact, just enough to reconstruct the system, to understand that sophisticated theology existed. But modern papyri discoveries continue, revealing new material. Hidden libraries from antiquity turn up. Sometimes they contain new fragments of Orphic texts. Scholars decipher them. Try to understand what these ancient teachings actually proposed, and the picture grows more complex, more radical, more philosophical. The evidence suggests Orphic schools maintained enormous libraries, treatises on metaphysics, guides for practice, mystical interpretation of myths, cosmological texts. The complete system was transmitted orally, but also preserved in written form. The writings were dangerous precisely because they could be copied, shared, preserved across generations, without requiring living teachers. Some scholars suggest Hermetic and alchemical traditions preserved Orphic knowledge in encoded form, that the secret symbols of later Western esotericism actually contain Orphic concepts, that certain tarot images or alchemical processes encode Orphic theology in forms that survived Christian suppression. The knowledge didn't die, it transformed, hid, became unrecognizable to persecutors. The books they burned contained formulas for achieving divine consciousness, techniques for transcending human limitation, knowledge that made individuals dangerous to established authority. Because once you learned these formulas, you operated outside normal power structures. You answered to different principles, followed different laws. So the books burned, centuries of accumulated teaching, destroyed, but fragments survived, enough for determined seekers to reconstruct, enough for the tradition to continue underground. Because some knowledge can't truly be destroyed. It exists not in ink and parchment, but in consciousness itself, in direct experience, in techniques that work regardless of whether ancient texts survive, in truths that reassert themselves generation after generation because they reflect something real about the structure of consciousness and cosmos. The Temple of Aphrodite in Corinth employed thousands, not slaves in the modern sense, though many came from slavery, priestesses, holy prostitutes, women who performed sacred acts inside a god's house. The purpose was cosmic, not commercial, though money exchanged hands. When a man lay with one of these priestesses, he believed he was lying with the goddess herself. The priestess was vessel, channel, temporary incarnation of divine femininity. The theology was precise. All women contained divine essence. All female sexuality was ultimately sacred sexuality. These priestesses trained to access that essence deliberately, to embody goddess consciousness, to transform mundane physical union into mystical experience. The client wasn't sinning, was participating in hieros gamos, sacred marriage, the eternal union of masculine and feminine principles that created the universe. In certain temples, the path to divine union was through flesher euro, and the priestesses who guided souls to heaven used their bodies as sacred portals. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii confirms this existed widely. Erotic frescoes in explicitly religious contexts, phallic amulets inscribed with divine names, temple chambers designed for intimate ritual. These weren't brothels decorated with religious symbols. They were sanctuaries where sexual union carried religious significance. But this wasn't simple promiscuity justified theologically. The priestesses trained rigorously. Some sources mention initiation rites, ascetic preparation, development of specific consciousness states. The goal was genuine transformation. When a man entered the temple, he underwent ritual, purification, ceremonial language, specific invocations. By the time he encountered the priestess, he was prepared. Consciousness primed, reality already shifted towards sacred reality. The priestess's role was equally deliberate, not simply pleasuring clients, but conducting them, guiding their consciousness through sexual experience toward divine encounter. Certain practices were taught, specific positions with astronomical significance, rhythms matching cosmic cycles, knowledge of which parts of the body accessed which divine qualities. The priestess was part shaman, part lover, part priest. Wealthy women sometimes funded these temples, gained financial independence through owning the priestess's labor. In a world where female economic independence was severely limited, becoming temple priestess or proprietor offered legitimate paths to power and wealth. Some priestesses accumulated enough to purchase their freedom, become property owners, establish their own cults. The Christian assault on these mysteries was immediate and thorough, not just condemned, violently suppressed. Churches rebuilt directly on these temple sites, Christian virgins replacing sacred prostitutes, the virgin birth replacing hieros gamos, single redemptive sacrifice replacing sacred sexuality. Christianity offered spiritual transformation without bodily participation, without female priestesses, without acknowledging flesh as pathway to the divine. But the memory persisted. In courtly love traditions, in troubadour poetry describing the lady as goddess, in later mystical theology elevating Mary to mediator between human and divine, in tantric traditions that survived outside Christianity's reach, the idea that flesh could be sacred, that sexuality could be transformative, that women could access divine power through embodied practices. This knowledge survived suppression, transformed, hid in codes and metaphors. The temples are gone, the priestesses scattered across centuries, but occasionally the old knowledge resurfaces, in unexpected places, in mystical traditions that claim to preserve ancient wisdom, in esoteric movements reviving goddess worship. The sacred prostitute remains archetype, the priestess of flesh remains symbol, not of sin but of transformation through the most intimate human acts. The bronze hand is small, fits in a palm, but it's covered with mystical symbols. Serpents coiled around the fingers, the palm marked with astrological signs. Most puzzling is the representation of a serpent entering and emerging from a vulva. The symbol is explicit, unmistakable, erotic, and religious simultaneously. These objects are called hands of Sabazios, discovered across the Mediterranean, dedicated to a god whose worship involved serpent mysteries. The serpent entered sacred space, often at night, in darkness. The initiates would hold the snake, feel it move across their skin, experience the serpent's touch as the god's touch. The reptile became vehicle for divine possession. The serpent that crawled across the initiate's naked flesh wasn't just a snake or euro. It was the god entering them in the most intimate way imaginable. Sabazios worship likely originated in Thrace, spread through Anatolia, reached Roman territories. The serpent represented cosmic sexuality, wisdom achieved through coiling, kundalini in ancient terminology, the awakening of dormant power through specific practices. The serpent climbing the body was spiritual energy moving upward, awakening centers of consciousness, preparing for transformation. Texts describe initiation rituals. The candidate would be stripped, blindfolded, then brought into contact with the serpent, the snake's touch unpredictable, unsettling, creating fear and arousal simultaneously. The psychological shock opened consciousness, trauma as initiatory gateway, the nervous system overloaded, normal consciousness disrupted, deeper layers exposed. Some mystery traditions combined serpent practice with sexual ritual, the serpent's path tracing the body's sacred geography, the genitals particularly significant, the vulva as gateway to another realm. Ancient sources describe priestesses trained to channel serpent energy through sexual practice, to achieve states of ecstatic possession where the boundary between human and divine dissolved. The theology proposed that creation originated from divine sexuality. The cosmos emerged from the union of masculine and feminine principles. Humans participated in this creative force through conscious sexuality, by channeling serpent energy correctly, by uniting masculine and feminine within themselves, by achieving specific states during sexual union. Initiates could briefly access the creative power that birthed the universe. Alternative sexuality carried profound spiritual significance. Forbidden unions, sacred sodomy, ritual bestiality. The exact practices remain obscure, but the pattern is clear. By violating conventional sexual boundaries, initiates accessed altered consciousness. By transgressing normal desire patterns, they tapped into deeper cosmic forces. The violation itself was transformative. Fear played a crucial role. The serpent was dangerous, could bite, could kill. Holding it activated survival terror. Terror opened consciousness, made the mind permeable to transcendent experience. This wasn't sadism, was understood as necessary. The body's defenses had to be overwhelmed for consciousness to expand. Some priestesses achieved legendary status, known for their ability to channel the god to achieve serpentine consciousness. Pilgrims traveled seeking blessing, seeking healing, seeking direct encounter with divine through sacred sexuality. The priestess became oracle, her words spoken with the god's voice. Her body became temple, literal dwelling place of the divine. The practices survived in hidden form. Medieval witchcraft traditions incorporated serpent symbolism, the goddess's familiar, the serpent familiar, hidden knowledge of sacred sexuality embedded in folklore, in folk magic, in traditions labeled demonic by authorities but actually containing remnants of ancient mystery. The magical papyri recovered from Egypt contain instructions for ritual sexual practice, specific positions, specific invocations, specific breathing patterns. The goal is explicit, drawing down divine presence through coordinated sexual activity. The union of man and woman becomes conduit. The sexual energy becomes gateway. At climax, the boundaries of individual consciousness dissolve. For a moment, complete union achieved. No separation, no individual versus cosmos. Temporary enlightenment, reproducible, achievable through technique. This is what certain mystery traditions promised. This is what esoteric practitioners taught. Not that enlightenment was ultimate goal saved for end-of-life liberation, but that it was accessible in moment of sacred sexual union. At the moment of climax, initiates believed they briefly became the gods Euro, experiencing the divine ecstasy that created the universe itself. The theology involved sophisticated understanding of consciousness. During normal experience, the mind remains localized, contained, aware of self as separate from world. But at the moment of sexual climax, this separation dissolves, consciousness expands, individual identity temporarily ceases. What remains is pure awareness, pure sensation, pure union with reality. The mystics recognized this as genuine enlightenment, actual access to cosmic consciousness. Just temporary, just fleeting, but real. Tantric traditions formalized these practices. Specific positions corresponded to specific chakras. Specific chakras corresponded to specific cosmic principles. By approaching sexual union mindfully, by directing consciousness intentionally, by using breathing and visualization, practitioners could access different frequencies of cosmic reality, could establish direct communication with specific divine forces. The practices went further for advanced initiates. Group rituals, multiple participants, ritualized orgies, the sexual energy multiplied, amplified, created vortices of consciousness that couldn't be achieved individually. The participants would lose individual identity completely, merge into collective consciousness, experience reality as unified field, individual boundaries dissolving entirely. Archaeological evidence from private shrines confirms this occurred. Erotic implements inscribed with divine names, altars stained with bodily fluids, artistic depictions of multi-participant ritual sexuality, all suggesting these weren't philosophical speculations, were practiced, were serious, were understood as spiritual technology. Women particularly benefited from these teachings. In a world where male sexuality was celebrated and female sexuality condemned, these mysteries elevated female sexual capacity, female pleasure, female agency. A priestess trained in sacred sexuality possessed spiritual authority, could teach men about cosmic forces, could initiate their transformation, could guide their consciousness to enlightenment. Some Gnostic groups developed elaborate sexual cosmologies, different sexual practices corresponding to different cosmic principles. Semen as divine substance, menstrual blood as sacred offering, the vagina as gateway to other realms. These weren't crude or degrading, were sophisticated theological statements, proposing that flesh and sexuality contained profound spiritual truth. The orgasm was understood as little death, temporary cessation of individual consciousness, and in that death, life eternal, union with something larger, something that transcended individual limitation. Orgasm as gateway, not just to pleasure, to meaning, to cosmic connection, to temporary divinity. Augustus enacted moral reforms, ostensibly to preserve Roman virtue. The real target was sexual mysteries. Practitioners faced penalties, exile, execution in severe cases. The authorities understood. Sacred sexuality made people unpredictable, made them answer to different authorities, made them realize that pleasure could be spiritual, that the body was sacred, that established hierarchies restricting sexuality served power rather than truth. They burned the temples and killed the priestesses. But the sacred marriage continued in forms so hidden that we're only now beginning to recognize them. Early Christian theology inherited extreme asceticism from this suppression. The body became enemy, sexuality became sin, celibacy became ideal, virginity became sacred. But this wasn't inevitable Christian teaching. Was Christian adaptation to political reality. Once Christians gained power, they had the same interest in suppressing sexual mysteries that pagan authorities had. Church councils passed laws. Possession of erotic religious texts meant execution. The literature was destroyed, but the techniques proved harder to eliminate. People discovered orgasm independently, discovered that it opened consciousness. The knowledge couldn't be unlearned, so it went underground. Medieval alchemists encoded sexual practices in symbolic language, the marriage of the red and white kings representing sacred sexual union, the great work requiring union of opposites. Codes layered upon codes, sufficiently obscure that church scholars could dismiss them as abstract philosophy. Meanwhile, initiates understood the literal meaning. Courtly love literature carried the tradition. The knight serving a lady as priest serves goddess, the elevation of female beauty to cosmic principle. The idea that union with the beloved granted spiritual transformation. The courtly love tradition preserved sacred sexuality's theology while hiding its practice. Witchcraft traditions incorporated sexual elements. The witch riding her familiar, the Sabbath involving orgiastic ritual. The accusations might have contained kernels of truth. Witches might have preserved ancient sexual mysteries. Continued practices, authorities called demonic, maintained techniques for accessing altered consciousness through embodied practice. Modern rediscovery of tantric traditions revealed the continuity. Practices described in medieval texts matched tantric teachings, suggesting transmission lines, hidden traditions continuing underground for centuries. The knowledge survived suppression, transformed, adapted, but never died. Recent papyri discoveries confirm sexual mysteries operated sophistication never suspected. Complex theology, advanced practice, integration into broader spiritual systems, treating sexuality not as separate from spirituality, as central to it, as pathway, as technology. The suppression created contradiction. Christianity preached hatred of flesh while adopting flesh theology. Christ's body, the Eucharist, bodies resurrected in afterlife. Yet condemning the flesh as evil, the contradiction created mystical underground, heretical movements rediscovering sacred sexuality, Gnostic groups teaching that matter was divine, that flesh wasn't prison but sacred gateway. The war continues in modified form. Modern religion still struggles with sexuality, treats it as separate from spirituality, creates cognitive dissonance. But the ancient mysteries knew something modernity forgot, that flesh and spirit aren't opposed, that sexuality and spirituality aren't contradictory, that the body's capacity for pleasure connects directly to consciousness's capacity for transformation. The priestesses are gone, the temples destroyed, the practices suppressed, but the experience remains. The orgasm still opens consciousness, the body still contains wisdom. The ancient knowledge survives in bodies, in experiences repeated generation after generation, waiting for the world to recognize what the mysteries always knew, that sacred and erotic aren't opposites, that flesh is gateway, that the most intimate human acts can carry the most profound spiritual truth. The temple site in Rome contains archaeological layers telling a remarkable story. On the deepest level, a Mithraeum. Above it, an Isis sanctuary. Above that, a shrine to Serapis. Above that, Christian church. The sequence isn't accidental. It's deliberate. Each tradition built on the previous, incorporated its symbols, adapted its practices. The same location sacred to multiple gods across centuries. The same rituals continuing under different names. The same initiates possibly moving between cults without experiencing contradiction. The greatest secret wasn't hidden in any single culta euro. It was the discovery that all mysteries were doorways to the same forbidden chamber. Inscriptions prove individual initiates joined multiple mystery traditions. A merchant's tomb indicates membership in Mithraic degrees, Isis mysteries, and a philosophical school. He didn't see contradiction. He saw convergence. Different paths up the same mountain. Different languages describing the same reality. Different techniques leading to identical experiences. Late antique philosophers realized this explicitly. Porphyry, Iamblichus, and other Neoplatonists created unified systems incorporating all available mysteries. They analyzed myths, compared theologies, discovered underlying structures. Every god was mask of the same divine reality. Every mystery revealed different facets of single truth. Every ritual, properly understood, conveyed identical knowledge through culture-specific symbolism. The evidence is fragmentary but suggestive. Some temples physically combined altars, syncretistic sites where Isis, Serapis, Mithras occupied the same sacred space. Architectural arrangements suggesting theological relationship. The apparent contradictions resolved through higher understanding. To uninitiated, the gods were distinct. To initiates of sufficient grade, they recognized themselves as emanations of something prior, something infinite, something beyond personality or mythology. The practical implications were revolutionary. If all mysteries pointed toward identical truth, then the specific tradition mattered less than the sincerity of seeking. A person could receive genuine transformation through any cult, the pathway less important than the destination, the map less important than the territory it mapped. This created theological space for religious pluralism in ancient world that was otherwise fractious. Different traditions could coexist peacefully because highest initiates understood they were describing the same reality in different dialects. Mithras was Serapis, was Dionysus, was Osiris, was an unnamed force beyond all names. The multiplicity was surface level, the unity was at depth. But this knowledge was dangerous to authorities. If all religions revealed identical truth, then no single institution held monopoly on salvation. Priests of one tradition couldn't claim exclusive access. Political power structures depending on religious monopoly would crumble. so the syncretistic knowledge remained confined to highest grades, shared only between initiates of sufficient advancement, hidden from masses who believed their tradition was uniquely true. The theological unity became invisible hierarchy. The apparent multiplicity of cults masked underlying conspiracy of enlightened individuals who recognized all mysteries as variations on single theme. The empire's apparent religious diversity concealed a secret spiritual governance, an invisible priesthood answering to principles beyond human law. Some scholars suggest Constantine's conversion involved recognition of this syncretism, that he realized Christian theology contained all the mysteries already: the dying and resurrecting God, the Divine Mother protecting the faithful, the cosmic victory over darkness, the promise of immortal life. Why resist one tradition when it already incorporated all others? The strategy succeeded. Christianity absorbed mystery traditions while appearing to oppose them, maintained the forms while changing the language, continued the practices while insisting they now served Christian purposes. The religious revolution that followed was partly conquest, partly absorption. The mysteries didn't disappear. They transformed, became Christian mysteries. The techniques were sophisticated, refined across centuries, tested on thousands, every element calculated to produce specific neurological effects. The mysteries weren't just theatre. They were ancient neurotechnology, methods for reliably accessing non-ordinary consciousness, for producing genuine mystical experiences, for permanently altering how initiates perceived reality. The sensory manipulation began with the journey. The walk from Athens to Eleusis, hours of walking, physical exhaustion opening consciousness, arriving in altered state before ceremonies even began, the body weakened, the mind permeable, then dietary control. Fasting for 9 days before Eleusinian initiation. Hunger weakens rational mind, makes consciousness vulnerable, creates suggestibility, removes the gatekeeper that normal consciousness maintains. By the time the kykeon was consumed, the initiate was predisposed to profound experience. Sleep deprivation intensified this. Backkick all-night dancing, Orphic vigil practices, Dionysian ceremonies lasting from sunset to sunrise. The sleep-deprived brain enters altered states. Normal waking consciousness can't maintain. The boundaries between dreaming and waking blur. The mysteries weren't just religious ceremonies or euro. They were ancient technologies for hacking human consciousness, and they worked. Psychoactive substances provided the chemical gateway. Ergot alkaloids in the kykeon, datura in Dionysian wine, mysterious herbs in Mithraic and Orphic preparations. The chemical formulas were carefully guarded, each cult developing specific recipes, maintaining exact dosages, avoiding toxic overdose while maximizing visionary potential. This was pharmacology, not crude experimentation. Sophisticated chemistry passed through generations. Sound technology was equally advanced. Rhythmic drumming bypassing rational thought, pipes playing dissonant frequencies, chanting synchronized with heartbeat. The acoustic environment designed to interfere with normal brain patterns, to induce resonance frequencies that altered consciousness. Modern neuroscience confirms these techniques work. Specific frequencies to shift brain states. Visual manipulation complemented audio technology. Darkness alternating with sudden brilliant light. As pupils adjusted, the brain's visual interpretation systems became confused. Illusions became convincing. Theatrical effects became seemingly supernatural. The telesterion's architecture created optimal conditions: acoustic chambers, hidden passages, machinery for controlled lighting and dramatic appearances. Ritual structure provided psychological framework. Initiation took specific form: purification, trials, revelation. Each element built commitment. Each stage deepened surrender. By the ceremony's climax, the initiate had abandoned rational skepticism, had entered psychological state, where direct mystical experience seemed not just possible but inevitable. Group context amplified individual experience, seeing 3,000 others undergoing identical transformation, hearing collective response, feeling crowds' emotion, the individual consciousness entrained to group consciousness. What might have been private hallucination became shared reality. Consensus reality created through group participation. The mysteries understood something. Modern psychology is just rediscovering. Set and setting matter as much as substance. The environment, the preparation, the expectation, the social context, these shaped experience as much as chemical or sensory inputs. Combine all elements correctly, and reliable transformation occurred. Modern psychedelic research documents identical principles. Set and setting as crucial as substance. Preparation and integration as important as the experience itself. The ancient mysteries were structured identically. They were prototype for modern therapeutic protocols. Except the mysteries worked with precision for 2,000 years, produced genuine transformation reliably, across diverse populations, across centuries, across cultures. The inscriptions describe them: perfect, illuminated, reborn. The language suggests not just believers, but transformed humans. People who'd undergone something that changed them permanently, fundamentally, spiritually. Ancient testimonies confirm this. Marcus Aurelius's meditation bearing marks of Eleusinian theology, his acceptance of death, his calm in face of suffering, transformed consciousness evident in how he lived. Porphyry's writings revealing mystical experiences that can't be adequately expressed in words. The author struggling to describe what he'd encountered directly. Apuleius's account of mystery initiation in The Golden Ass, depicting irreversible transformation. The protagonist returning to ordinary life, but permanently changed. No longer quite human. The illuminated ones experienced something that broke ordinary consciousness patterns. They lost death fear, permanently, not through philosophical argument, through direct experience. They'd glimpsed something beyond the veil, encountered something they understood as genuinely divine. Nothing would ever convince them that death was final. They'd already died, already experienced transformation, had seen the other side. They returned from initiation fundamentally changed a euro. No longer fully human, no longer afraid of death, no longer bound by the rules that governed ordinary mortals. They formed shadow networks, recognizing each other through subtle signs, creating parallel social structures. The official hierarchy didn't matter. The mystery hierarchy was real. The invisible world of initiated consciousness transcended visible world of political power. An Eleusinian senator outranked an uninitiated general. A Mithraic slave possessed authority that transcended his social position. Within temple walls, within the company of initiates, these shadow networks wielded enormous influence. Not through conspiracy necessarily, just through shared understanding, through bonds transcending normal social divisions, through willingness to answer to principles higher than human law, through sense of cosmic connection that made ordinary concerns seem trivial. When people believe they're serving cosmic truth rather than political power, they become unpredictable, potentially dangerous. But they became something else too. Sources describe their integrity, their serenity, their seeming detachment from the normal human concerns that motivated everyone else. They accumulated spiritual authority. People sensed it, some feared it, others sought blessing from it. The illuminated ones didn't need legal authority. Their spiritual authority transcended it. Women particularly found power through this. In Eleusinian mysteries, women achieved grades impossible in ordinary society. Women priestesses commanded respect, held authority over men, possessed spiritual knowledge. The illuminated women gained independence through religious transformation, became oracles, teachers, leaders, finding in mystery structures the authority patriarchy denied them. The illuminated ones died peacefully. The tomb inscriptions testify. No fear, no despair, just calm acceptance, occasionally gratitude. They'd seen what awaited, had already been there. Death was repetition, familiar territory. They walked toward it without resistance, with the composure of travelers returning to well-known homeland. This terrified authorities. People who weren't afraid of death couldn't be controlled through fear. People convinced of cosmic purpose pursued it regardless of legal prohibition. People believing in something beyond human law answered to different authority. These weren't subversive revolutionaries. Often they were respectable citizens, but their illumination made them fundamentally unreliable servants of state power. Constantine understood. The mysteries created people whose first loyalty was to cosmic principles, whose second loyalty was to their mysterious brotherhood, whose third loyalty was to the state. That ordering couldn't be tolerated. Better to convert the state itself to a religion that made individuals more controllable. Christianity offered similar transformation but with different outcome. Individual mystical experience subordinate to institutional authority. The illuminated ones became soldiers of the church rather than cosmic truth. The mysteries died, but the illuminated ones spread its influence backward through history. Every Christian saint exhibiting inexplicable serenity in face of martyrdom was carrying forward what mysteries taught: the detachment from death fear, the certainty of cosmic meaning, the conviction that this life was prelude. Every mystic after the mysteries discovering identical experiences through different techniques. Because the mysteries weren't unique paths to enlightenment. They were merely one articulation of something universal. The human capacity to transcend ordinary consciousness, to access direct experience of cosmic reality, to become something beyond ordinary human. Theodosius issued the edicts. Valentinian before him. Then Alaric's Goths arrived. The destruction was deliberate. Temples weren't just abandoned, walls smashed, altars broken, sacred objects removed, everything possible eliminated. The authorities understood the danger. Let the temple stand and the traditions might return. Leave intact any ritual implements, and rogue priests might restart ceremonies. Systematic destruction was necessary. The last Hierophant of Eleusis performed the final ceremony around 395 CE. The goddess didn't speak that year. The mysteries had ended. For the first time in 2,000 years, the sacred rites wouldn't be celebrated. The tradition that had survived wars and conquests and political upheavals couldn't survive Christianity. Not because Christianity was spiritually superior, because Constantine possessed political power to enforce his choice. When the emperor chose one religion, others became illegal. When temples became churches, mysteries became heresies. When priests became executioners of their predecessors, the cycle completed. The temples were destroyed, the priests killed, the books burned a euro. But initiates whispered that the real mystery had already escaped into forms the destroyers would never recognize. But something remarkable happened. The mysteries didn't die. They transformed. The knowledge went underground. Hermetic traditions claimed continuous transmission from pre-Christian Alexandria. Secret societies emerging centuries later in medieval Europe carried mystery symbols. Rosicrucians spoke of ancient wisdom. Freemasons maintained initiatic grades echoing Mithraic and Eleusinian structures. Kabbalah incorporated Orphic cosmology. Islamic Sufism preserved ecstatic techniques. The knowledge scattered but survived, some surviving through direct transmission. Secret communities maintaining practices in hidden locations. Caves, forests, private homes, priests passing knowledge to successors. Keeping alive fragments of tradition, sometimes for centuries, until political conditions allowed partial re-emergence, sometimes disappearing entirely as communities were discovered and destroyed. Much survived through encoding. Medieval alchemists wrote in symbolic language. Every furnace operation was spiritual process. Every chemical transformation was consciousness transformation. The recipes were codes, sufficient to protect from orthodox scrutiny. clear enough for informed readers to reconstruct actual practices. Modern scholars only now beginning to decode these medieval texts, realizing that esoteric traditions preserved ancient knowledge in disguised form. Modern archaeology continues discoveries. Sealed caves revealing hidden practices. Papyri fragments showing advanced techniques. Sculptures with meaning only now becoming clear. The mysteries are slowly being reconstructed. Not perfectly. Too much was lost, but enough to understand that sophisticated spirituality existed. Enough to recognize that ancient peoples possessed genuine understanding of consciousness. Enough to see parallels between ancient mysteries and modern psychedelic therapy. Some scholars suggest certain lineages continued unbroken, specific families maintaining traditions through centuries, hiding in plain sight by becoming Christian monks, by adopting superficially orthodox appearance while maintaining esoteric practices, by encoding ancient knowledge in Christian mysticism, by creating monasteries in remote locations where unusual practices wouldn't be noticed. The mysteries transformed because mystical experience itself can't be permanently suppressed. Individuals continue discovering how to access altered consciousness, rediscovering ancient techniques independently, achieving identical mystical experiences through different methods. The core experience, dissolution of ego, encounter with something transcendent, permanent transformation of consciousness, remains accessible. The specific rituals matter less than understanding consciousness itself. The real mystery never existed in temples or texts. Existed in direct experience, in the human capacity to transcend ordinary consciousness, in the possibility of genuine encounter with ultimate reality, in the transformation of individuals who've glimpsed something beyond themselves. These mysteries survive because they're not dependent on external institutions. They exist in the nervous system, in consciousness itself, in the eternal capacity of the human mind to access something beyond itself. The authorities closed the temples believing they'd killed the mysteries. What they actually did was free them, liberated them from physical form, made them impossible to control through mere suppression. The mysteries continue wherever people access direct mystical experience. In meditation, in psychedelic states, in artistic inspiration, in moments of grace that strike unexpectedly, the goddess still speaks. The god still initiates. The mysteries endure. The last priest sealed the temple doors, performed final ceremony, hid sacred objects, then walked away. The temple's stone and marble. The real mystery went with the priest, into consciousness, into continuing tradition, into future seekers who would eventually rediscover what all mysteries taught. That human consciousness contains infinity, that transcendence is possible, that the ancient world died believing truths that the modern world is only now beginning to remember. The mysteries live because mystical experience is eternal, death-proof, suppression-proof, existing wherever consciousness awakens to its own nature. The blood stops flowing. The torches extinguish. The hierophants die. But the revelation survives. The transformation persists. The journey continues. Everyone who awakens to reality beyond ordinary consciousness participates in the most ancient mystery, the only mystery that matters, the experience that has called to seekers across all times and all cultures and all possible futures. The temples remain ruins, the rituals are lost, the priests are dust, but the mystery endures, and will endure, as long as consciousness itself continues seeking its own source.